The time is 6 p.m. I'd like to call to order the 20th of June 2018 San Francisco Election Commission. Sorry, haven't used the mic. Secretary Chan, would you call the roll, please?
President Donaldson.
Here.
Donaldson here. Vice President Mogi.
Here.
Mogi here. Commissioner Hill.
Here.
Hill here. Commissioner Judonic.
Here.
Judonic here. Commissioner Jung.
Here.
Jung here. Commissioner Rowe.
Here.
Rowe here. All present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item.
Item 2, general public comment. Public comment on any issue within the Election Commission's general jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
Hello, Commissioners. Brent Turner with California Association of Voting Officials. Just wanted to make comment on some of the breaking news around the state pertaining to elections and election systems. We saw that many counties suffered issues regarding running out of ballots. And I think we want to take a look. I don't think we had that problem, although I haven't received our report. I've requested a incident report from Mr. Slocum in John Arndt's office. I haven't received the report, so I don't know. But just interestingly, we ran out of ballots all over the state, which is just something so simple that it almost defies comprehension. But we certainly want to be sensitive to that, and when we talk about next generation of election systems, the printed ballot that is utilized by the Deckert design is optimal so that you never have that particular issue. I think also everybody probably saw the news that Los Angeles County had their next meltdown, which is why every time Los Angeles is raised as an example of elections, we are quick to say, don't use them as an example. They had 120,000 people knocked off their rolls, their voter rolls. That was some sort of a software glitch. And then, interestingly, we thought that Dean Logan would be terminated at that point by the county supervisors, but instead they went ahead and allowed him to contract to the tune of $300 million for a proprietary system, which is very interesting. They contracted with a group called Smartmatic that has Venezuelan, Russian ties documented, secret software. It's incomprehensible what's going on in Los Angeles. It's very ripe for a qui tam lawsuit there, and we just want to make sure that everybody's paying attention to some of these issues that are happening. Finally, today, Secretary Padilla released a press statement saying that the $143 million or whatever that figure is that has been allocated can be utilized by the counties for open source systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any other members of the public? Seeing none, Secretary Chan, next item, please.
Item 3, June 5th, 2018 election. Discussion and possible action regarding conduct of the June 5th, 2018 consolidated direct primary election.
So I put this on the calendar just in case there were members of the public, or I'm sorry, on the agenda in case there were members of the public that wanted to come and comment on the election, and also Director Arndt's was kind enough to include some preliminary reports that are in the agenda pack. So just want to point that out to the commissioners and the public. Those items, and we can go into them some here if we want to, but I think right now they're more for information. But it includes the edge voting, the incident reporting, and to Mr. Turner's comment on that, so that is included. in the book. So I guess the only other question I would have, Director Arntz, is when do you expect to certify the election to the Secretary of State?
Early next week,
Okay. I think you have all the way till the 6th of July, actually.
July 5th.
July 5th, okay. And these are preliminary, so there may be some changes to these documents, is that correct?
Yes, I don't know how much they're going to change at this point, but they're not, nothing's final until I certify.
Okay.
Correct.
And of course, an interesting election with the RCV and the number of rounds that it took for mayor. I guess that's the most rounds we've had in an RCV.
No, for mayor, but not for a ranked choice contest.
Ah, okay. Was it the District 10 race, I guess, a
Correct.
few years back? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So I think that, again, this is informational. We'll look at it. The suggestion is that, and I wrote an email to Commissioners Jung and Mogi about having a BOPEC meeting to go over this in detail in the final version. So we will expect to do that. But any other comments or questions at this time on the June 5th election, Commissioners?
Yeah, I have a few quick things to say. I'm going to hold off most of my comments until the next meeting where we do the review, but I did work the polls, and I also started writing a document with some observations for the next meeting. And I had a couple questions for you, Director Ernst, and this might be in one of the documents, but do you know the number of remote accessible, the users of the remote accessible system?
As 100?
100? Okay. And also, do you know much more about the situation that happened in LA County? Do you know anything?
Not.
Okay.
Other commissioners? Public comment?
Yes, Brent Turner again. We did put in a request for the incident report, and the public has not been given that as of yet, or we would make comment. So a couple of things that came to mind. We wanted to, and generally the office was very good. There were a lot of observers there, a ton of observers at certain moments. We wanted to be around the incident room, and the sheriff was very protective of that. It is, I think, a interesting point of perspective to take a look at the incidents and sort of recognize them as they're coming in, to witness the volume of incidents. That's a way to sort of tell what's going on out in the field. And the way the sheriff was positioned, that wasn't necessarily an inviting room, and that is really the only thing relevant in real time during the election, is to witness the incidents and to be privy to that room. The way the sheriff was positioned, it was apparent that observing that was less than comfortable. So if there was something to be said, other than that, everybody, all the people in the office were very welcoming. Mr. Slocum gave a nice tour of all the different rooms. We have a suggestion that the bulk of the operations should be in one large room. Instead, everything is sort of siloed off into little cubby holes, which I think is just the nature of the geographic beast that we have here at City Hall. Ideally, we would have one big room where you could sort of understand the operation, but the fact that it's in jutting down little hallways and such into little private rooms, it's hard to get an overview. But these are just general ideas coming from an observation perspective, and we do look forward to seeing the incident report. Thank you.
That actually does bring up a question, Director Arntz. I looked on the site to see if these documents were available anywhere, and maybe they were for prior elections, maybe they're published when they're final. But are these documents available directly on the site? Of course, we have the election results and things there.
Which documents?
The incident report, the documents that are in the agenda pack, for example.
No, we make them public through the commission, by providing them to the commission.
Okay. Okay. These are, I assume, subject to sunshine request, though. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll provide this.
Okay. So
I think the commission has always included them in agenda packet and
Sure.
discussed them. So they're always, you can
They're
pull them
public
up on the
by that
website
means.
through our
Yep.
website.
So they are, for members of the public and Mr. Turner, they are available as part of the agenda pack online at this point as the preliminary documents. And they will be in our, in BOPEC and the next month's meeting as well. Any other comments, commissioners? Okay, Secretary Chan, next item, please.
Item number 4, commission media piece about the June 5th, 2018 election and future plans. Discussion and possible action regarding the commission publishing an op-ed and/or blog post about the June 5th, 2018 election and future plans, including about the use of ranked choice voting.
Okay, this item, I believe, was requested by Commissioner Hill. You'd like to talk about your item? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So in the packet is an op-ed draft, opinion editorial draft, that was drafted in response to some public questions and concerns around the impact of ranked choice voting in the most recent mayoral election. So the intention of the op-ed is to address and clarify what seem to be some misunderstandings and or mischaracterizations of how ranked choice voting factored into this last election, and also to preview a series of changes and upgrades to our election system that will be improving the future of elections for San Francisco voters. The op-ed was drafted and reviewed by me, by Commissioner Mogi, and by Commissioner Jordanic, and it is presented here to the full commission for recommended publication, ideally in the San Francisco Chronicle. So if it is approved by the commission, the next step would be to submit the op-ed to the Chronicle. Of course, we can't control whether or not they publish it, but we're hopeful, especially given all the attention that ranked choice voting has received in the last few weeks. I was hoping that Commissioner Jordanic might be able to speak a little bit more about his vision for the op-ed, since he's also been instrumental in drafting it and reviewing it.
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that I noticed leading up to the election, also after the election, is that there seemed to be a lot of misinformation around ranked choice voting from certain newspapers in the area. And, just to give you one example, or a couple examples, like leading up to the election, the Chronicle wrote an editorial saying that the system is baffling, and then there were articles after the election saying the system is controversial, and they said that this was like one of the lowest turnout elections ever, and they also said that there's an AP article saying that there's a quirk of the ranked choice voting system that caused the results to be very delayed. And so, as we all know, the results are known on election night, and it's because the election was close that it caused, we needed to wait more days to find out the result. So when I spoke about it with Commissioner Hill, we thought that addressing some of these misconceptions would be a good way for the commission to help educate the public, and also to let the public know that there are going to be improvements on the horizon. So things like the new Dominion system that we're going to be getting starting next year, which will have a more intuitive ballot layout and also let voters rank more candidates. So the piece, it just includes different points and statistics, and and I think it sort of speaks for itself. But I was thinking that in terms of publishing it, we could try, like Commissioner Hill said, we can aim for the Chronicle, and then if they don't publish it, we can maybe submit it to the Examiner or their various political blogs, and then in addition, there's a later agenda item where we could perhaps post it on a commission blog, kind of in addition to the newspapers. So, but thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jung?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, I'd like to say thank you to Commissioner Hill, Mogan, Jurnatic for putting in the work. Obviously very well intentioned, and I appreciate you all putting in the effort for this. I did have some questions about some of the conclusions and logic in the op-ed. And I'm not sure if you want to go through it here, but I'm not sure. I assume you're planning to, should the commission approve, seek publication in the Chronicle right away. Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, but I think if there were, for example, if there were certain numbers that, like if the commission wanted to confirm something, we could maybe delegate that some particular statistic be checked, or if there was some kind of a tweak that we weren't able to make tonight. But basically that would be the idea.
Yeah. Okay, well, in no particular order, and why don't I just start from the top then? These are some things that stood out for me that didn't necessarily follow, or it seemed to me that it wasn't entirely logically supported. 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth paragraph, voters have adapted well to the instant runoff ranked choice system. And the evidence that you gave for that is that 86% of voters ranked at least 2 candidates, and 7 in 10 ranked their top 3 candidates. More than 9 in 10 supported a candidate who made it to the final round of the election. Those, I don't doubt those facts, but to me that doesn't logically, or necessarily support the conclusion that voters have adapted well to the instant runoff ranked choice. 2 paragraphs down from there, the op-ed writes, London Breed and Mark Leno did an excellent job at connecting with San Francisco voters. I have to say I don't feel comfortable with that language, or kind of describing in adjectives and adverbs what any particular political candidate did or didn't do, and how well they did their job at connecting with voters, even if and the evidence for that is, I see the evidence, but it just doesn't lead me to that conclusion. Same with the next, similar comments on the next paragraph. Voters also made very few errors on their RCV ballots. Only 1/4% of more than 250 ballots had a disqualifying overvote. This is far smaller than in the non-RCV election. Again, to me, doesn't logically follow. Then you compare it to the U.S. Senate race, where you say there were 7 times more overvotes than in the mayor's race. The next paragraph, you make the assertion that RCV system ensured higher voter participation than in the old December runoff system. That seems likely true, but I'm not sure how we can say that it ensured higher voter participation. Yeah, and then this next paragraph is one that I addressed to Commissioner Hill. RCV also ensures that San Francisco voters can choose from a diverse pool of candidates. I mean, that's, I guess that is part of the, the literature surrounding RCV, and that's the theory. But then you go on to say, we are pleased to report the San Francisco RCV system has a strong track record of electing people of color. And the evidence that you gave was that of the 18 offices in San Francisco elected by RCV, 13 are held by office holders of color. I'm not sure that's the logical metric. I mean, maybe RCV versus alternative systems. Does that increase, kind of comprehension and turnout by voters of color? I mean, that seems to me maybe a more, kind of a more logical comparison. Anyway, those are just some of the thoughts that I had.
Comment from the authors?
Sure. I'm wondering whether you have, thank you, first of all, for the feedback. I think it's really interesting and well thought out. I'm curious about if you have suggested language for those, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 particular areas that you think might work better. It could be that and the two approaches that come to mind for me are that we maintain the arguments in these first lines of these paragraphs and adjust the evidence to support them. It could also be that we look at the evidence that we have and adjust those first lines to bring them, closer together. And I'm curious about which of those you might like to see us do, and if you have suggested language.
Yeah, thanks. I guess what I'd like to see is if the commissioners saw misleading public statements relating to kind of the facts surrounding RCV, then I suggest we address those, right? So, if one of the facts, for instance, is that this was one of the lowest voter turnout elections ever, address that fact. Likewise, if one of the public statements was there's a quirk in RCV that caused the results to be delayed, we'll clarify that fact. It seems to me here that we go beyond that, and even if you stripped out the adjectives and adverbs and the statements about two mayoral candidates doing an excellent job connecting with San Francisco voters, it wasn't clear to me that the rest of this followed.
I would like to hear Commissioner Jordanik's response from my involvement in this. It's my understanding that really each of these paragraphs is addressing a misconception or mischaracterization that has circulated, be it in media outlets or on Twitter, on social media, different conversations that we have seen play out over the last few weeks. So I read this and I can't identify anything that is in here that is not addressing some misunderstanding that I've seen out in the world. Commissioner Jordanik might have more to say there.
Yeah, well, so I guess in terms of process for right now, I mean, one question would be, are you okay with the spirit of the piece? And that way we can work from there. And then the second is, assuming you're okay with the spirit of it, I think a lot of your questions we could maybe try to address in some form right now. But like, for example, the thing about did an excellent job at connecting with San Francisco voters, like maybe that could be rephrased to be, the data also shows that both mayoral finalists were ranked by a very high number of voters. You know what I'm saying? It like more ties to the fact that follows. But it kind of, as the person bringing the concerns, it's kind of, what would you be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, that is an example. I think that would be more factual, and I would support that change.
Mr. President, may I be heard?
Yes.
I'd like to
Sorry,
address the
Commissioner
sort of
Rowe.
the spirit of the piece part, because my concern about this is sort of the language that you used, that we're presenting arguments and evidence, and I don't think we're supposed to be making arguments, and I think there's a lot of implicit value judgments in most of these paragraphs, and I think we take for granted a lot of them, but it's not really our role to make those value judgments. And I'm just going to give one example. The paragraph talking about congratulating on higher voter turnout, we may all assume that that's a good thing, but there are lots of voters or members of our public who don't necessarily think voter turnout in itself is a goal. They want different, they have different goals. And whatever we think about that, our job as a commission really is to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to vote, that they know about the election, that it's a fair election, that they're not interfered with. And this is just one example, but I think we're embedding in almost every one of these paragraphs a different value judgment that, perhaps we all share, but that's not really our role as a commission. Our role as a commission is to be apolitical, to not advocate, to not make value judgments about things like voter turnout or ranked choice voting or particular mayor finalists or whether a certain number of errors is good or bad. And so I have a problem with us taking a public position on what I see as arguments that go beyond our scope. I really think we need to try as a commission very hard to maintain our absolute neutrality and make sure that we're focusing just on the process of making sure that the elections work for people and the way that they come out shouldn't. I'm very concerned about what we're doing if we actually go to press with these types of things. I don't disagree if there are discrete facts that we want to correct, like the delay or something. Frankly, I think somebody could call the reporter. I don't know. I mean, we could do that by a press release if we want to. I don't have as much of a problem with it. But I really do think the spirit of this piece is not consistent with our role as a commission. And I couldn't support this. And if this is what the commission decides that they want to do, I would ask the motion, I would ask that the motion be denied, but if it's going to be passed, I would ask that it not be done in the name of the commission, but that it be individual commissioners' names, because I really don't. This isn't the type of commissioner that I see as my role. And I'm sorry for that. I'm not trying to be critical. I do appreciate the spirit of it. I just think it's not consistent with what we're supposed to be doing here, for at least what I think I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, do you think that one of our roles as a commission is to build, confidence and trust in the system that voters use? Because I know a lot of the sentiments that were being expressed are almost trying to kind of instill this idea in voters that they should be confused or baffled or that the system is controversial, but it's it's the law, and that's what we do in San Francisco. So we have a role where we want to build voters' confidence in the systems that we use. So
my concern with that is that it assumes that they're supposed to trust that system. And there is so much to this system, and some people have legitimate concerns about different elements of the system. And so for instance, if we're trying to build confidence in ranked choice voting, that wasn't our decision. That was the voters' decision to do ranked choice voting. And once they voted that, and that's the law, that's what we support. But I don't know that it's our job then to build confidence in that particular system. It's our job to ensure that it works. And I don't have a problem correcting factual misstatements, but I don't see it as our job to build confidence in something that the voters decided to do and could decide tomorrow they don't want to do. That's not up to us, nor do I think it should be.
Well, what about something like open source voting? That's an idea that we've been advocating for as a commission, but it's not merely making sure that things work correctly.
I see it as making sure things work correctly. I see open source voting as a systems issue, as a process issue, as a fair, functional, transparent system issue. I think that I personally distinguish that between ranked choice voting and non-ranked choice voting, where by picking one system over the other, there is an impact on the actual outcome of an election. And we acknowledge that in this letter, for instance, by saying that this encourages a diverse pool of candidates. I'm not disagreeing with that statement or saying that's wrong, but there are impacts that the voters have decided to encourage because of the ranked choice voting. I don't think open source voting is going to impact political results over what types of candidates are presented or who gets elected. I think open source voting is a way to make sure that we can keep our elections safe and transparent, safe mostly, through transparency. So to me, they're qualitatively different.
I want to go on the record and say that to me, this sounds like a distinction between perhaps the values that you feel comfortable with the commission championing, because safety, the safety of an electoral system, the transparency of it, those are values, just as are the desire to see relatively few errors on a ballot, or the desire to see some amount of voter turnout. I hear your desire to not assume that certain values are things that the commission will endorse or push forward, but I would argue that there are other values beyond the safety of elections and the transparency of systems that the commission should endorse, but I recognize that those might not be shared across the commission.
And that's a fair comment. There are values, everywhere, but some of those values are in our charter. And I am focusing on the ones that are in our charter, which is really the process issue, the free, functional, fair election. To me, is where that's what the voters told us they want to do and what we're supposed to do. And my fear is when we veer out of that, we are tarnishing our own appearance of not being biased. That's my fear, and I strive to try to keep it on what we do on a pretty process level for that purpose. I think that ultimately the voters, if they're going to trust us, it's because we don't. We try to stay within that charter, and I'm just cautious. I appreciate your point. You're right. There are values, and there are values. Everything's a value. Free, fair, functional is a value as well. I just am more comfortable sticking with those ones that are in our charter as passed by the voters.
Other commissioners, comments? I guess I would just like to add that as I read this, I do think there's some value judgments here that go beyond, I think, the scope of what to Commissioner Rowe's point, go beyond the scope of what the commission was chartered to do. That said, I do think that correcting any misstatements of fact and things like, for example, we talked here about also, we talk about how long it took to do this. Well, I mean, if there were a very close race, it's going to take actually processing those ballots as well. The difference is that if there's a runoff, then you're actually going to have to run another election, which is mentioned here. But I think that making the point that RCV did not lengthen the time it would take to do this, it prevented having to have another election, and that would happen regardless in a close race, things like that. And so I think that something, at least that I would definitely support, is an educational awareness piece that actually pointed out things that were misstatements in the press, or if there's things we could specifically cite, or if there were certain other kinds of maybe not, say, paraphrasing or something, certain points that were misconceptions about RCV, I would certainly support that as an education awareness piece.
Right, and we can do all of those things without being a cheerleader for RCV in and of itself.
Yeah, clarifying kinds of comments and things that are that correct I guess it starts to get gray where you start saying misconceptions, but I would call them misconceptions.
I guess I have a question, is that if it is part of our charter, or the voters have voted into doing an RCV, if the commission doesn't champion it, then who is supposed to be championing a process that we are asked to execute, or asking the department to execute?
Well, I think maybe this does go to a question as to whether the policy, as a policy body, something like RCV is a policy we can endorse, because there's the policy aspect and there's the execution aspect to assure that something that the voters, in my mind, that the voters have chosen to do, and that we make sure that it is executed properly with our oversight function and implemented properly. And I think that's a line of distinction that, at least to me, is pretty clear.
Could I just ask the deputy city attorney, what are the policies that the commission is, permitted to weigh in on?
I think this is really, for the commission today, a choice that you could make. primarily the policies that the commission adopts are policies about the operation of the department. Whether the city uses RCV or a runoff or some other election process is a choice for the voters and outside the control of this commission. Nothing in the charter prohibits you from taking a position endorsing RCV. For instance, if the commissioners felt that RCV wasn't serving the goals of the city, you could adopt a resolution urging the Board of Supervisors to place a charter amendment on the ballot, adopting a different type of system. So I think this isn't so much about what your charter authority is or the restraints of the charter on you legally, as much as I think it is about how you view your role. And I think that's, as I understand it, that's Commissioner Rowe's point. You're not legally prohibited from submitting an op-ed like this.
Thanks.
Other comments, commissioners?
And I will point out, though, just taking a look at our commission's bylaws, Section 1 sets out the purpose, and to, consonant with what the deputy city attorney mentioned, we are, deputized to set general policies, but those are policies for the Department of Elections and not necessarily for how votes, with the system in which votes should be tallied. Likewise, in Section B, the only other enumerated purpose of the commission is to be responsible for the proper administration of general practices, but not general practices generally as they might touch upon any element of elections, but specifically as it relates to the Department of Elections.
Thank you, Commissioner Jung. Further comment?
It sounds to me like there may be a different format and perhaps a subset of the information that is the more factual information included in this op-ed draft that commissioners might be more amenable to publishing. And I don't know if now would be the time to discuss what that might look like. I heard someone mention a press release, maybe articulating some of the mischaracterizations that have been raised in various outlets, and then laying out some of the facts of the most recent election to kind of set the record straight. I don't know if people have thoughts on that.
That certainly would be the perspective I would like to see in this. And I do think that there's still a lot of education and correction and misconception about our RCV that I think is worth addressing.
I wonder if would that be better done through us as a body, or inviting the Chronicle to submit those questions to our director, who has the factual basis to answer and clarify and to clear up misconceptions.
I don't think we should, this is personally, I don't think we should ask the Chronicle to submit questions, because, they're already, they can already do whatever they want. This is kind of in response to what they've already done.
So I guess I would just like to, from the summary I hear and from what Commissioner Hill said, I think that it would be, personally, I believe, going away and doing something that is consistent with some of these comments. I do think that, for the most part, what we would end up with here is something that probably the department already has in terms of education awareness materials in a lot of ways, but it'd be a statement that would come from the commission that I think would be another means by which to raise awareness and education. So my suggestion would be, yes, to take some of these comments back, and I think, again, I think having something from the commission would be impactful and would be worth doing, personally.
President Donaldson, I was wondering if maybe you could do public comment now, just because I see some...
Absolutely. All right, any other comments, commissioners? Okay, public comment?
Good evening. I'm Jim Soper with the Voting Rights Task Force, but in this case, not speaking for them. I saw several articles in the press that were going crazy over why this is a bad thing, RC is a bad thing, and then I read things here like more than 9 in 10 voters supported a candidate who made it to the final round. That would indicate they get it. Whereas maybe several years ago they weren't getting it. This is important because then they can, the opponents are saying people are getting confused. Well, looks like they're not. And that needs to get out. And if it's a press release, and I see that press release, I will pass it on to people who are very good in social media and get that out. An article or op-ed in the Chronicle would also be very good, but I think you need to do something because, yes, you're here to run good elections. And part of it is educating the population on what's working and what doesn't work. And this is raw data, generally. So, yeah, I would encourage that to come out. I would ask one thing here when you say more than 9 in 10 voters supported a candidate who made it to the final round. I think there were probably several elections on this ballot that had RCV, not just one. So how many votes made it to the candidates made it to the final round per election, per contest, and I would like to see that data, but I suspect it's not bad, and I think it's better than the public is aware of, so I would support getting this information out somehow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey. I appreciate some of the issues that this raises for the Commission. My perspective is that there are actually quite a few values that this Commission tends to promote that go beyond just the plain language of the Charter. I think if you were too literal about, taking that approach, you'd have some issues about, whether you're supporting outreach to certain communities that tend not to vote very much, for example. And I think I think that there's certainly some, issues that are dealing with, process issues in the Department of Elections, but free, fair, and functional elections really covers quite a bit of territory, I think, if you interpret that as broadly as it should be interpreted. But with that said, and understanding, the issue about how the commission acts as a body, I would see a lot of value to something like this being published by a group of individual commissioners as individual commissioners rather than as the commission as a whole, and that might be a way of kind of accomplishing some of the goals that I think are intended without and still respecting some of the concerns that have been raised here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Other members of the public?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Stephen Hill. I've been involved in the Elections Commission since the beginning. I was one of the original co-drafters of the legislation to create you all. And there was a lot of discussion about these very same issues back then, and there have been throughout. Some of you, before you were on the commission, some of your fellow commissioners at that time, like Reverend Arnold Townsend, wanted to create a Friends of San Francisco Elections, just like there's Friends of the San Francisco Library. And that would be focused on trying to do more voter education and outreach and helping to amplify the actions of the elections, of Department of Elections on these very same things, recognizing that sometimes the department its hands are really already taken up with the things that it does, and that there needs to be more done to do outreach and to make people in San Francisco feel comfortable about San Francisco elections. That proposal for San Francisco, Friends of San Francisco Elections, there weren't any resources. We tried to find some nonprofit support for such a thing and just weren't able to do it. So, it really does, I think, strike to what is the role of the commission. And it seems to me that as a commission, frankly, nobody knows you even exist. No one knows there's a San Francisco Elections Commission. They don't know who you are as individuals. They don't know if they even know you exist. They don't know how you're appointed. And to me, this is not keeping with the intent that we had originally when we created the San Francisco Elections Commission. We wanted it to be a proactive commission that worked with the department and also created oversight to the department. This was before Director Arntz was even the director. This was during the times when there were ballot boxes floating in the bay. Some of you may have remembered these times. And so it seems like the commission has done an adequate job, but it's never really fulfilled the potential of the original mission to really be out there and active and proactive in helping San Franciscans to know that there is someone watching, there is someone making sure that elections are running well here in San Francisco. In this particular election, as we've seen in past elections, there was a lot of misinformation being put out in the public. San Francisco Chronicle was certainly one source of that. There were others as well. For those of you who maybe don't remember, the San Francisco Chronicle led a repeal effort of ranked choice voting in 2011 and 2012. It went to the Board of Supervisors. There was almost a vote at the Board of Supervisors to put it on the ballot to repeal it. So the San Francisco Chronicle is a long-standing opposition. It goes all the way back to when we passed ranked choice voting in 2002. The San Francisco Chronicle was opposed to it as well. So I think there's a role here for the commission to be a referee of public information, of what is right, what is wrong, so people don't have misinformation about what ranked choice voting is, how it works. When people think that the ranked choice voting is holding up the releasing of results, that undermines your ability to be a commission. That undermines the ability of Director of Elections. I'll finish up very quickly. There was one report on KQED where they actually were, in some ways, playfully, but poking fun at the Director of Elections that, even he doesn't know how ranked choice voting works. And that undermines the authority of the director when the public is thinking that this crazy system and there's all these loose facts out there and it doesn't really work. So I really hope that you will embrace a fuller mission of what the commission could be to help San Franciscans have better elections.
Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. Brent Turner with CAVO. We are agnostic as the California Association of Voting Officials regarding ranked choice voting. I can argue both sides of it. I appreciate the comments made by all the commissioners here and the objective of trying to make clarifications, and I think Mr. Carey stated it very well. One thing that I think we can all agree on, if you're going to use a ranked choice voting system, it has to be open source. It can't be closed secret software on top of more secret software, because that just makes for a bigger mess. So I wanted to take exception to one thing that Mr. Hill said, which is that this commission has not done a forward-thinking job in so far, because this commission has done work that has led the country toward open source election systems, which, as I think everyone here knows, is a priority, the priority in our opinion. So if we're going to talk about ranked choice, I think it should just have the asterisk that it has to be open source. It cannot be closed source. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any other members of the public? All right. Commissioners, any other comments or action on this item?
Well, I have a question, just kind of informally, how would, just for the sake of the rest of this discussion, how would commissioners feel about a stronger, or maybe not strong, a broader op-ed that is signed by a subset of the commission versus one that is more narrowly construed, that's signed by the adopted by the full commission? Like what are people okay with this evening?
Can you explain that a little further? Would you say election commissioner and name for each person, or would it just be under your name as a citizen?
It would be as I think the first option would be the individual names, but listed as commissioners, and maybe there would be, that would be what I was.
I'd like to ask the deputy city attorney, what would, yeah.
Sure.
Thoughts?
If three of you, but not two members of BOPEC, so say the three of you who drafted the original draft, want to place an op-ed in a paper and identify yourselves as commissioners, you can do that. That's something that you can do in your personal capacities, identifying yourselves as commissioners in order to demonstrate your expertise, but you would not be speaking on behalf of the commission. If four of you are interested in putting your names on an op-ed, that needs to be approved by the commission today. The final op-ed doesn't need to be approved. You could delegate one person to finalize it following the instructions that the commission adopts by motion today.
So I'll just state what I stated earlier. I do think that there's a lot of value in correcting misconceptions. It sounds like we can't even prevent three members from putting their names on something, as long as it did not state that it was representing the commission itself. So I don't want to discourage something that people feel strongly about personally. But I do think, and I would like to see something that was factual and educational and raised awareness about things that are incorrect and have been stated incorrectly in the press or after this election. Commissioner Rowe?
Yeah, I would say that timeliness is obviously an issue, so if we were going to try to revise this, and as a full commission, we wouldn't be able to get to it till next month, by which no one's going to publish it because it's outdated. So as I heard most of the comments here, I did think there was a consensus, maybe unanimity, for correcting the factual misunderstandings. And, I think that the concern, at least that I expressed and maybe Commissioner Jung expressed, was more about the arguments or the policies. And so if I'm actually, I have been convinced that it is a good idea to correct the factual misstatements on a very narrow basis, and I don't think we can do that as a body because of the timing problem. So if three of you wanted to do that, if three of you wanted to present this commission, I personally think it's a bad idea for the reasons that I expressed. But if three of you wanted to present something as a press release that just addressed the factual issues, I would support that.
Any other comments, commissioners? I think that just to Commissioner Rowe's comment, I guess I would also suggest that if, let's call this an opinion piece because it is an op-ed, is the suggestion. And if three commissioners wanted to publish that, I think you've heard the comments here. I think the one other thing is that in advance of the November election, it might be useful to actually write something in advance of that election that address the specific misconceptions or misstatements in the press. And maybe the timing of that, to Commissioner Rowe's point, publishing something, say, next month or in August is not going to have as much impact. So that just as a suggestion.
I mean, Commissioner Hill and Commissioner Mogi, it sounds to me like, after this meeting, we could decide whether to sign something as three individuals, and then maybe in addition, we could come back to the next meeting with something that tries to address the other commissioners' concerns that might be narrower. I don't know.
Yeah, and I will add, I would like to have that conversation. I would like to move forward on that path. And I also, as I expressed before, am grateful for the feedback on, I think, the tone of the draft that we have right now, and a desire to see a closer link between some of these kind of introductory, kind of like summary sentences in each paragraph and the data that we offer that follows from them. So I certainly think that there are some tweaks that could be made to bring those closer in line to one another.
So is the suggestion today is that we can meet after just to make some small edits and tweaks, and then following up is before the November election have a more of a fact-based or educational-based piece that we can hopefully get the full commission support to submit or to publish to the public. Is that am I understanding you correctly, or everyone here?
Yes, at least from my perspective. Commissioner Rowe?
Yeah, I'd just like to be heard on that. I really think that the appearance of impartiality is so important for this commission, and I think if you, three of you, publish something like this that's similar to this with just small tweaks, I think you're harming our appearance of impartiality. You guys are going to do what you want to do, but I would urge you to keep it very factual, and I don't think a few tweaks to this is enough.
I guess, sorry, one question I have is if the commission, if we do at a later meeting decide to adopt something, I'm wondering what would be the right way to publicize something? I mean, would it be given that it wouldn't be timely, would it be like I mean, for people that were suggesting having something that's more fact-based, how would we get the word out about that?
I saw a suggestion somewhere in the materials about publishing on Medium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think we can look at, and I guess what I would suggest is when we get to that point, thinking about ways we could get that out, what are the other channels that we might want to consider as well? And I would suggest we consider that at that time so that we can move on. If that's acceptable. Yes? Any other comments, commissioners? Okay.
It's my understanding that the question was, what is the proposal at this point? It's my understanding that the proposal is that Commissioners Mogi, Jordanek, and Hill, myself, will speak separately, make some adjustments to the op-ed draft, and pursue publication of that draft under our individual names, identifying ourselves as commissioners in an outlet, in a local media outlet. I don't want to speak for Commissioner Mogi, but I believe that you're still part of that group of three, and that at a future date, the commission will consider a related piece, but something that more lists out perhaps some mischaracterizations and addresses them and provides facts about the voting system in San Francisco in advance of the November election.
I think that was a good summary. Thank you, commissioners. Secretary Chan, next item, please.
Item 5, open source voting. Discussion and possible action regarding the City and County of San Francisco's open source voting system project in 3 parts. A, Technical Advisory Committee update. B, Director's report. C, Ohio use of Prime 3.
Okay, we'll start with item A. Commissioner Jordanek, do we have a member of the TAC here?
We do.
To speak?
Member Wasserman, thank you for coming.
What's our normal time? Is it 3 minutes for the speaker?
Well, this is not subject to the limit.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. So there are a couple of things we want to talk about. The first thing, maybe a side issue, is that we as a committee were given a very detailed tour of the election vote counting process while it was still going on. So on the afternoon of the 8th, before they had gotten to the provisional ballots, we met as a group, and we were appropriately badged and shown through the various areas of the election processing and the vote counting. And for me, it was very enlightening because seeing all the steps that one has to go through to validate. And some of them are fairly time-consuming and human labor-intensive. I was also struck by the number of ballots that needed, shall we say, exceptional handling. And I think that's an issue going forward, because if you have an automated system and a big percentage of the votes need to be handled separately, that certainly complicates matters. But as they say, I found it very enlightening. I had no idea that there was that much paper on the ground floor of City Hall. Not just this year's, but going back for several years. So I learned a lot from that process. But to get to the open source voting committee, I think the last time I was here at the commission meeting, I think that was before Ms. Hill joined, but it was the evening that the slalom people delivered their report to the committee. And so that was my last turn to speak. I'm sorry? Microphone. I'm speaking into the microphone. Where is...
If you'd stay closer to it. Then
Kick it. I am. I'm right.
there, perfect, right there.
All right. So, where were we? Okay. So since then, we, as individual committee members, have had a chance to look thoroughly at the report delivered by Slalom, and as you have seen, it's a very detailed report that goes down into the weeds in some places. But as an individual member of the committee, I was really very disappointed by the report. And I think that what has occurred in the two committee meetings since then is that collectively we as a committee have come to a mutual understanding that the report is severely flawed. And we spent quite a bit of time at our meeting last week going on into the night for a while to identify some of the problems. So some of the ones you've received in your packet, a summary of the message that we sent that identified some of the glaring examples in terms of cost estimations and failure to look at the work that was being done with open source in other states. And I would say also a really poor approach to the process that one would use to develop such a system. So you've seen that, but I wanted to add just a little bit to it. One is that to me, they kind of, how should we say it, expressed what I would call a textbook view of open source. That is, they didn't give any evidence that anyone working on that project for Slalom actually had built open source software or participated in a community of open source. And so, they got their material from external printed sources or web sources. So one example for it, to bring this to you, is that for me and for those of us who work in open source, there's some code that you write and contribute yourself as a member of a team. But there are also pieces of open source software that you use that other people have built. So for example, if we were considering a database management system, an open source database management system to be part of this voting system, we wouldn't write our own. We wouldn't want a contractor to write it for us. There are a lot of options out there that they could use. So the first distinction is between the part of a system that the team would be responsible for and write, and the second part is what you would use from others. And now when you look at that second category, there's another important distinction, which is some software that has just been put out there by others that is perhaps being maintained and there's a community. But there's another piece, which is open source software that's actively supported by a company to which you can subscribe. So if I want to use the Linux operating system, sure, I can get the kernel code and edit it myself and use it. But if I'm building it for an enterprise or for something that needs to be secure, I'm much more likely to subscribe to the service from one of the vendors of open source of Linux operating systems, because we know that they're going to deliver the patches and they're going to maintain it and they're going to be up to date. And I don't want to spend my time digging into the code. I'm going to rely on them to do it. So the Slalom report really didn't show any understanding of that distinction, which to me kind of is a red flag. The other thing is been pointed out here, but we can go through and estimate and look at their cost estimates, and many of them are just, I would say, way off base. And as one example of that, members of our committee wrote a results reporting piece and put a GPL license on it, an open source copyleft license on it, and made it available to the public. So you can go into GitHub, which is the most widely used repository for open source code, and as of Sunday night, I think, anybody in the world can take that code, use it for their purposes, modify it, all the freedoms that come with open source to read, run, modify, and redistribute the code. So, to make a long story short, we just came away with the impression that Slalom's recommended approach wasn't going to work, and that the city of San Francisco should not invest additional resources in trying to follow their recommendations, but should instead go back to recommendations that were made by the Technical Advisory Committee and by others who have deeper knowledge of open source and voting systems. Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions?
I just want to thank you. That was really educational for me. I appreciate the basic building blocks. So next time you're up, I'd love more lessons, if you don't mind. That was really very helpful to me. So
Thank you very much.
You're a good teacher.
Am I going to get away with just that? All right. Thank you very much.
I'm not smart enough to ask you any questions, so that's all you
Come
get.
on, you have a law degree from a good school, and don't fool me. All right, thank you.
I would like to ask, just being familiar, and I haven't looked at it actually, the most recent version, but I have looked at the TAC recommendations as they've been developed. And I've also read the Slalom report and have many concerns about it, as I'm not a deep technologist, but I am a software professional, and there's certain things there that, and been working on open source for some time. There are a lot of things that I was concerned with from that report that seemed rather sort of an academic, or a lot of fudging and breadth of like hedging bets, let's say, of like wide ranges of estimates and things. But that said, Mr. Buffone, I'm just wondering, when you say take the recommendations of the TAC, it sounded like versus Slalom. I don't think at least in my reading, it's not clear to me what things are in opposition, let's say, to what's in the slalom report.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found in the slalom report was the assumption that you were going to build a system monolithically. So in the slalom report, they did a very good job, I thought, of calling out the different components that are part of an open source system, or of any voting system, I should say. But they didn't make the next logical step, was that you can build these things in a modular and incremental fashion using an agile approach. And so there's a place specifically where the slalom report and our recommendations have the overlap of identifying voting system components, but which differ strongly philosophically on how one goes about building those components and the process that one uses. Does that help?
That does. Are there other areas that you would say that stood out?
Well, I think that the cost estimates were very loose in the slalom report. As I mentioned, we built the reporting results module, not we, I should not say, but members of our committee, in very short order. I mean, we're talking one person for a couple of weeks equivalent, so a person month. So figure that the cost of doing that is, $20,000 maybe fully loaded. That's an order of magnitude off from the number that we saw in the slalom report. Now, of course, there are ongoing costs with any piece of software to maintain it and deal with security issues and porting it to new versions. So that 20,000 is not a final number, but it reflects an approach where open source software and community participation and reuse of software written by others brings the cost down very, very substantially. So I felt, and I think my fellow committee members agree, that the numbers that Slalom provided were, let's be gentle and say, on the high side. Because I don't think that they had the experience from previous open source or agile development to produce a more accurate estimate.
Mr. Wasserman, I have a question.
Yes.
Have you, and thank you for this work and for the presentation, have you had an opportunity to share your conclusions with Slalom?
No. Slalom in Appendix A gives a list of the people that they spoke to, and they indeed did speak to 2 members of our committee, but I did not hear from them personally, so no.
And if you were to have you give 3 examples here in your June 15 memo about glaring examples of omissions and inaccuracies, inadequacies in the Slalom report. 2 of those have to do with costs. One has to do with lack of consideration given to open source election software developed in other jurisdictions, like New Hampshire, Colorado. What would it look like if you were to have out of fairness to Slalom, and I think, some members of this commission, myself included, expressed some reservations or criticisms of the Slalom report at the last hearing. What would a productive conversation look like between our TAC and Slalom?
Yeah, that would be funny. So one of the points I tried to make in describing our reaction was that at the fundamental level, we don't think that Slalom understands the processes and the philosophy of open source software. We don't think that they understand the distinction between having your own code and using other people's open source code and using them to, build a system out of a number of different components. So, I teach a class in open source software which starts on Monday, the 2nd of July, and maybe I would invite them to come to that class because they need a grounding in the fundamentals around open source software that I don't think was evident in their report, and which would be an inhibitor to a fruitful discussion with them about how they could proceed or revise their work. I hope that helps.
Well, I asked the question because, in effect, I think your conclusion as TAC is junk the report and ignore it. But the city, I'm not sure that that's the most productive thing that we can express.
Well, there are
hold on a second. And
there are needles in haystacks.
And as a matter of professionalism, as slalom, if I were they, I might want to respond to some of the specific criticism. So I wonder, as TAC, whether you all considered, whether you'd be open to considering giving kind of a more granular criticism in letter form and asking Slalom to respond. They can choose whether to or not, and certainly it's not going to, they're not going to get paid more money because we don't have the money for it, but just food for thought.
There are some things in the Slalom report that are valuable. I mean, the decomposition of the system model into components, the reminders of a whole lot of issues that one has to consider around such things as processes for handling disabled voters. So there are things in there that are valuable in terms of helping whoever builds the system to remember, we got to deal with all these things, right? So that part, I respect the work that they did and some of the low-level detail that they went through. I think that's valuable, but it's those underlying ideas around open source and agile processes where we would have to go back, I think, to pretty much to square one to see how to do it. You can't build a system like this effectively monolithically, and that's implied where they have this hybrid agile waterfall model where you do some stuff and then you stop in the middle and you fudge it and then you come back to the other. So I think, speaking for myself, I can't speak for my colleagues on the committee. I'm always happy to talk to people. That's kind of how I've always lived when I ran a company and as an academic. You want to have a chat? Fine. And so I for one would be agreeable to this. I won't get paid either, but to the expectation that they would be able to then go back and produce something that would be to everyone's liking, that seems highly unlikely to me. Does that help?
Would it be fair to say that, to sum that up as you're open to talking, but you don't really think there's a point?
Well, depends who you talk to. I mean, the document they produced is the collective judgment of a group of people in the company who worked on it. And it's quite possible that there are individuals working for Slalom or consultants to Slalom who do get it. And they would be, that would be a useful discussion. But there are also people there, I would suspect, who just pulled boilerplates text from other work that they've done and slapped it in there without really considering the context of voting and open source and processes. So.
And question for you, Mr. Wasserman, or for Commissioner Jurdonic as a chair. Would the TAC consider going back and at least addressing some specific areas, or putting this memo is useful, sort of calling out some generalities, but I think these specific areas, to Commissioner Jung's point, that Slalom, if they chose to, could respond to. That also would allow us as a commission to understand what the TAC, which has been chartered by this commission, is coming back with in its evaluation as to the areas that could be either should be discounted in slalom or should be considered differently based on the recommendations of the TAC.
So you'd like an iterative approach and an agile approach to developing the document.
Or at least something that was more specific. And of course, we do have the resolution, so perhaps Commissioner Jordanek, that would be its address there. But anyways, I don't know that we need a motion on that, but I think I would like to have something that did more specifically, a document that more specifically addressed what the problem.
I think what we tried to do in this meeting, and it was getting late at night, I must say, and we had not had dinner, I don't think, any of us. But we tried to pick out the most egregious instances in the report, whereas we could have certainly gone on at some length. And as you heard, I added a few items to the list that's in the June 15th memo. So we could certainly expand on it, but it's not clear to me what the intended outcome of that exercise would be in terms of moving the city forward toward its goals of creating an open source voting system.
Well, here I can suggest one potential outcome, which is that there's something against which a decision maker might compare the slalom report. You see what I say? I mean, it's something that's more, that to me would be more useful than a wholesale rejection. So I'll just give you an example. So in the draft resolution, one of the whereas clauses, I'm not sure if you had anything to do with this draft resolution or not, but
no, haven't. I've seen it, but I didn't touch it.
I mean, it's consonant with kind of what we've heard from TAC. But if so, for instance, on page 3, one of the whereas clauses says Slalom's report recommended a waterfall-like approach and lacked the information, specificity, and credibility needed for San Francisco leaders, stakeholders, et cetera. And, I assume here you're referencing, that monolithic waterfall-like approach rather than, what's been referred to here as the agile approach. I mean, it might be useful as part of that response and conversation to have Slalom admit that, we use the term agile, but that's not really what we modeled out and budgeted, and our widely varying ranges of numbers, is fair to characterize as a waterfall-like approach.
Yeah, but one thing I should add that I didn't mention earlier is that the city has spent a modest amount of money for this feasibility study, but Slalom comes back and asks for over $1 million to do a discovery phase. And it's not at all clear to me what value would be added by spending $1 million on the discovery phase. It's, there's a mindset. And let me give you an example. I used to run a company. We sold software to run on engineering workstations, which were a big thing at one point. And when PCs became much stronger, much more powerful, and Windows was dominant, the culture of our company was such that it was very difficult for us to make the strategic change. We didn't have salespeople or engineers or marketeers or anybody else who understood this other market. And I think that there's a certain amount to that at Slalom where they really have a solid understanding of a certain market segment, and we're asking them to do something in a segment with which they're not familiar. And so when they get stuck, they fall back on what they know. I think that there's a certain element of that in the report, and this material on page 3 just enumerates, in the resolution on page 3, it enumerates just some of those issues.
Commissioners, any other questions for Mr. Wasserman? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Commissioner Jordanek, we have the resolution here that you have offered, a draft resolution. I do want to point out to the commissioners, if you haven't looked, we do have the memo from TAC that at a high level addresses these things. The resolution is related to this as well. Also, I do want to point out that a member of the public, Mr. David Carey, has provided a document where he went into some detail about issues he had with the report, and has been here a number of times at the commission, and I think has done a good job of analysis and has some foundation in this kind of work. So I do want to point to those things. I think at this point, I would like to ask Commissioner Jordanek if you want to consider the resolution at this time, or?
Well, I thought we could maybe do the resolution as the last item on this agenda, but I wanted to, one thing I'd like to do before the resolution is just give an update on a few different things.
Okay,
And then
under the open source
Yes.
item? Okay, so let's see.
And maybe also hear from the
Organize
director.
this. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and take some public comment at this time on the TAC report, because that was rather extensive, and I think, so.
Hello, my name is David Schmidt. I'm a member of the California Clean Money Campaign Board, and we are very much in favor of open source, publicly owned open source voting systems. And as a board member of the California Clean Money Campaign, I'd like to thank the Elections Commission for your leadership on open source voting systems. And I'd like to make a few comments about the resolution that is before you tonight. We support the resolution because we agree that the cost estimates in the Slalom report are poorly supported, and we feel they're exaggerated. We agree that the Department of Elections should own the open source project because they're the ones who will use it, and they have the public input process that is especially important for open source voting. We agree that the project should be developed incrementally with a robust development schedule for the coming year. We would also like to ask if the Commission could create a subcommittee of the Commission to work with the Open Source Technical Advisory Committee to create a basic initial plan for developing its open source voting system using the agile principles of your resolution to present to the Supervisor's Budget Committee in time to advise this year's budget, with the caveat that the project manager would be able to refine and amend the plan as needed. We think that this could help give the Budget Committee some idea of what they'd be giving the funding for if they allocated the funds to the control of the Department of Elections, as your resolution requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt.
Could I just ask you a question? The idea that you just described, what is the timeline for the board this year? Do you know?
I'm not sure, but I believe the board has to finalize and approve the budget by the end of July. Is that correct? Can anyone else confirm that?
It sounds right. Director Ernst, do you know?
Yes, the board has to approve the budget before August 1st, or by August 1st. Right now, the board's in the middle of budget hearings, with the intent of finalizing the budget out of committee by the end of June. And typically, the budget that comes out of committee is very close to the final budget that the board approves in July.
When was the date that it comes out of the committee?
There's not a set date, but we anticipate it's the last Thursday or Friday in June.
Okay, so that's just a week away.
Right, and then the budget will be at the board on July 17th, with the idea that it will be adopted on July 24th and July 31st, and additional amendments can be made on the 24th before they adopt it.
Okay, and one other question for you. So I had our secretary add to the packet a press release from California Clean Money that you sent out back the first week of June. And this kind of relates to the point you just said, because it quotes a number of members of the Board of Supervisors to be in favor of funding the project. Is that right?
That is correct.
Could you maybe just summarize the statements that were made and who made them?
I don't have that with me.
Okay, well, so this is Mayor-elect London Breed, Budget Chair Malia Cohen, Supervisor Jane Kim, and then also, I believe the Supervisor-elect Rafael Mandelman also spoke in support at the rally.
And Mark Leno. But again, I don't have it with me.
Okay.
Yes, that appears to be more detail, of course. The statements in the agenda pack from those candidates or elected officials.
Thanks for mentioning it.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Other members of the public who would wish to comment?
Just a point of clarification, you're asking for a comment about the OSVTAC?
Yes.
And not right now for the resolution?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll come back.
Well, so thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey, and just briefly, I'll say the OSVTAC statement about the slalom report is a very strong statement that briefly summarizes many reasons why the slalom report should not be relied upon for determining the future direction of the project. And I encourage you to heed the advice of your expert advisors as represented in their statement. Thank you.
Very good. Other members? Yes.
Yes, Commissioners, again, Brent Turner, representing California Association of Voting Officials. Going back in time to previous statements from Mr. Wasserman, the remakes that are occurring within the department, those are something we need to look at. There's an extensive amount of remade ballots that occur, and that is something that would not be happening if we had a properly designed system. You would never have somebody in a back room trading one ballot onto another ballot like that. That's a security issue, obviously, and we want to remedy that with a proper system that I think we're on the brink of moving toward. Mr. Wasserman is very gentlemanly when he approaches this issue of the slalom report, and unfortunately, that does a disservice. This is what you would call a scam or a ripoff, what occurred here with the public's money. We introduced slalom to the foremost experts in the world regarding open source election systems, Brian Fox and Dr. Juan Gilbert, and it became apparent in that meeting that they had no history and no experience in open source at all. And the two foremost experts in the world said that they would be available for free to guide them through this process. They never heard from them again. So I don't know how we ended up with this company. We have to get our money back from these people. They cannot be allowed to come in here at the direction of Silicon Valley and Microsoft, who just bought GitHub that Mr. Wasserman referenced. The biggest depository for open source software is now owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft is coming forward with their own open source election system. So as I have continued to say to this commission, to my own detriment, there is more here than meets the eye. These are very muddy waters when you're talking about getting a proper vote count in the United States. There's a lot of pressure being applied behind the scenes here to take us off track, to do the wrong thing, and to delay our progress. So I implore you, as I always have, be very aware of what's going on here and let us move forward. Thank you.
Mr. Turner, other members of the public on this item?
Hi, my name is Adam Koszek. I'm 31 and I developed software for probably over 15 years now, mostly doing open source. And from just the perspective of the report, I have some hints about what you can ask Slalom, and that could help you out. So first question I would ask is why the estimate is so wide, the price estimate. The other question is the justification of the headcount that showed up in the report. The other question would be were the certification costs included in the report? I haven't developed the government systems, but I know people who do, and the main cost there is the requirement that change. So if the requirements for the open source system or the next generation voting system are not set, very often companies include the costs of these requirements that change, which extends the process of development. And it can go anything from 1x to 3x. That's why often when you see the estimates like that, the estimate is from $10 million to $30 million because nobody really knows what the government wants. And I feel like one of the problems here is that actually the requirements are, first of all, not set in stone, and second of all, there is no clear guidance about how the incremental delivery to the government is done. So for example, if I were to be a company that would be willing to take the contract from the city and let's say develop system like that, I'm not sure how long will it take. Will it take a year or will it take 10 years? And in that case, my estimate will be from $10 to $30 million. Were regulatory costs also included in the report? For example, if the system is delivered and the development job is finished, is it that the company who delivered the code of the system, is it that they will have to take the cost of the certification of the system? And if the system, let's say, doesn't pass the certification at the first take, who will take the cost of, coming back, fixing it up, going back to Sacramento, trying to certify the system, and let's say doing 3, 4, 5, 10 rounds of such development? So I don't know if that's helpful, but all these things will help you out with understanding why the report is delivered the way it's delivered and why the costs are the way they are mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kozak. Other members of the public?
Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Kurt Grimes. I am the program manager for the A. Philip Randolph Institute San Francisco. My organization supports and encourages voter registration, participation, and its education. I wanted to introduce one of my interns here for the RILA program. It's the Resilient Youth Leadership Academy. I have 17 students, of which 9 of them have participated in registering and encouraging people to vote over this past election. With that being said, my organization and I definitely do support the open source voting. The reason why is because we believe that it does encourage our youth to participate in this process. I encourage you and I support you in your efforts to further your research to make this effort happen. Thank you.
Mr. Grimes? Sure.
I have a quick follow-up question. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us, and thank you for joining us. Could you speak a little bit more about the connection that you see between open source voting and youth involvement in elections?
Well, my youth, like this young man right here, went out on the corners throughout the city here in San Francisco and tried to get people to register to vote. It's a very simple process, but it's something that takes a little bit of time. One of the things that we have here, everyone in this room, as I look around, you all have one of these, and you all have used it to purchase things over the phone. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Currently, our youth use this thing more than anything else. They use it more than they use even their own school books. This tool can be one of the things that we can do to encourage our youth to participate in the voting process.
Thank you.
All you need is your a California ID, and the last 4 digits of your SOCH, along with an address, and you're pretty much registered. If you can do that here, most students and most kids use these things more than they use paper. Why not?
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Good evening, Jim Soper. I said, I think it was 2 months ago here, and I'm going to have to repeat it. One of the problems with the slalom report, they're doing a risk assessment. They failed to assess the risk of not doing this. Well, Los Angeles County announced they have a contract with, I forget the name for the moment, $282 million to build their system. Now that's, I think, including hardware. And what we were asking in Sacramento was a tiny fraction of that. Or I said a month ago, we were asking for less than 1,000th of 1% of the surplus they had just found in the budget, and it didn't come through. Things like the slalom report do damage in Sacramento. And they get people say, oh, it's going to cost too much. Well, even if it costs $27 million, it wouldn't cost too much. If you compare what it would save, the state of California alone in getting these systems out over the course of years, that would be cheaper than what the state or the counties would have to pay for. So I think this failed to make a risk assessment of what happens when you don't do it. And I think that needs to be made clear. And I was in Sacramento on Monday and Tuesday, and somebody in an assembly member's office, well-placed, said the person to blame for this is Phil Ting from San Francisco, chair of the Budget Committee of the Assembly. He didn't push hard enough to get this through. If people need to talk to somebody, it would have been Mr. Ting. I think people talked to him, but it didn't happen, and this should have been a no-brainer. So I think, yeah, the slalom report needs a response. It needs a strong response, because this is not good for the city, this is not good for the state, and this is not good for the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soper. Other members of the public on this item? Commissioner Jordanic, you said you had a comment. Was it further to TAC, or was it on?
Well, just sort of my own report, the commissioner report on this topic.
Okay.
Prior to the resolution.
So we had the director's report next. Do you want to go before or after that?
I can go after. It's fine.
Okay. So the director's report. So Director Arntz, if you could.
Can I, before we move on,
Yes.
were we going to vote on the resolution, or are you moving past item 5?
No, we are still on item 5. We were just taking comment on the first item.
Director's
the
report
TAC.
within item 5.
And
My
then the
apologies.
director's report. Yes. And though it's actually not enumerated as D, it is the next item, so we would consider the resolution last, as I would suggest.
The resolution would be 5D.
Yes. It's in the packet. It's under this item of 5, and I'm suggesting that we take it as 5D, if you will.
Oh, I see. Is that, I'll ask the Deputy City Attorney, is that adequately noticed? So we describe in the agenda 5 open source voting, and then discussion and possible action regarding open source voting system project. Apparently there was an omission on D, but there is a parenthetical that refers to a document. Resolution number 2, is that adequately noticed?
Yes, you could vote on the resolution based on this agenda.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Director Arntz, if you could comment on your director's report as relevant to open source voting.
Yeah, so the Director of Technology, Linda Durrell, has drafted a job description for a project manager which we funded from the COIT monies allocated, was it last month? the $300,000 plus the 125 left over from the 1823 the department didn't hire, so $425,000 total. And the job description for the project manager would be a 5504, which pays, so I think that the top number is 180, but then you have to add about 38% for fringe benefit costs, so it'll be 250 would probably be a year's cost for this person. And this person would be to pull together the requirements and also to get a sense of the other information sources regarding open source voting and open source, as has been mentioned here, and also to get a sense of a schedule of when the products could be created and put into place, as well as approved by Secretary of State's office. And also, and probably most importantly for the city, to start attaching some cost to the development of the open source components. The initial thought, which I reported last month, was the Director of Technology would issue an RFP to fund this position, but instead she's going to go through the HR process the city has. The job description was placed on the Department of Human Resources website. The Department of Technology has a recruiting service they use already to fill positions. So DT will use the recruiting service to advertise this position even further beyond the DHR's website. And the director believes that the job description will be done within a few weeks and we can get it posted. And then start the announcement, the interviews, and all that.
Okay. So I have a couple questions. So the director of the department was able to do that even before the budget was approved?
So this is from the COIT monies. So this is the money allocated from COIT. It's not coming from the general fund. So the money that the commission is requesting is from the general fund. And that's why you're asking the board for these monies, where COIT has already allocated the $300,000 this fiscal year going forward, and then the $125,000 from the current fiscal year. So July 1st is when you can start to go out to, and we do this in the department too. We'll go out and start advertising for a position, and then so it'll be funded 3 quarters this fiscal year. That's how it normally works. So when you start a new position in a new fiscal year, it's funded 3 quarters. So whatever is not covered by the current fiscal year, $300,000 from COIT, can be covered by the $125,000 remainder from the current fiscal year. Mm-hmm. So there will be funding for the position.
And then also, in your understanding, has the city decided on a project owner for the project?
Right now, the project owner would be Department of Technology. So this would be a position that is situated in the Department of Technology, and certainly the department, if there's questions or need for information regarding election processes, then the department would provide that.
Okay, and then what was the decision-making process for that? Was that from the mayor or from you, or like the decision for who the owner would be?
I don't know. I don't.
Or how do you know that that's the owner?
Well, that's because the Director of Technology is the one drafting the job description. She's the one who has the recruiting service that will be working to recruit candidates for the position. So the position would be housed in Department of Technology.
So if the Department of Technology would be the owner, then does that mean we wouldn't have a formal oversight role, like in terms of if we're not happy with the direction of the project?
Yeah, again, like I said last meeting, this has to be a city project. The commission can't control all aspects of the voting system. So I think that's a conversation that needs to happen at the city level still, how this does move forward as far as ownership, because I don't think the commission can set an expectation for itself that it would be the primary overseer of this type of project, because certainly the Department of Technology is going to have a say. And as I was mentioning last month, the financial aspect, the city will have to fund this going forward and allocate funds. And So I think more people have to come to the table than just the Elections Commission as far as oversight and who's involved in developing the voting system. So as far as this position is concerned, I mean, certainly there's nothing, this person could attend the TAC meetings, this person could attend the commission meetings, have interactions with TAC and the commission. So I don't know. So for me, it's a city project more than it's an Elections Commission project.
Deputy City Attorney, so if the Department of Technology was going to be the project owner for this project, and does that mean that we would be unable to set a policy that the project should follow?
The Commission can set a policy for the department's involvement in the project. I mean, what I understand the Director Orange to be saying is there's going to be a role for the Department of Elections. There's going to be a role for the Department of Technology. It may be that as this moves forward in the next year, the board or the mayor also sets out some of that division of labor more explicitly, either through the mayor's office or through legislation. So the Elections Commission could not adopt a binding policy on the director of the Department of Technology.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Director Arns, who's going to be doing the vetting and the interviewing of this person then? Is it the Department of Technology?
We haven't had that conversation. I'm sure I'll have the elections aspect, but this is mostly a technology project. So the director of technology has more experience than I do by far when it comes to a project manager to build a large technical project like a voting system. Ideally, the candidates and the successful candidate will have elections experience with voting systems and election processes, but this is mostly a tech project, so the Department of Technology would have, to me, most of the say on the type of qualifications that the candidates need to have in relation to being successful as a project manager to bring together a plan, cost, timelines for developing an open source voting system.
I don't know how much we can do about this, but I'm very concerned based upon what we've heard about the slalom report that we end up with something similar if the wrong person is hired for this position that doesn't have the understanding, not only the technological understanding and the open source understanding, but the voting system understanding. And, some of our members of the public have voiced numerous times that there are people with expertise in that who were not really, from what I hear, they weren't really listened to in the slalom report. And I just would hate for that to happen again with this person. And, I don't know if we can do anything about it, but I would hope that when this process is going forward, the hiring process, that you talk with whoever it is at the Department of Technology, that they involve you so that you can include that. And I would encourage some involvement of, I don't know if this is even possible, but somehow some input from the people who have now, I think some of these concerns were voiced before slalom was selected. I think we were warned that this might happen, and then it did happen. And we now, on experience, I think, shouldn't allow it to happen again. I'm just concerned about it. And I want to make sure that the experts are, if they can't be in the room, I don't know. If they can be in the room, great. If they can't be in the room, that they've been consulted and provided the full basis of that experience, because we just can't keep doing this every year where we put processes in place that don't have the unique expertise that's needed for this project.
Yeah, one of the primary roles of this person is to draw people together and draw information sources into the process. The slalom report's a starting point. It was never meant to be an end point. I understand people have concerns about it, but it was never meant to be the final point in the discussion or the considerations of developing a voting system. So the next step would be in a sense a discovery, but not just a discovery and putting out more potential paths to follow, but to start to set more requirements and specifications for a system, for instance. That hasn't happened. And also start to put down statements of how the process will take place. And And this is, as the previous speaker indicated, how does the Secretary of State's process for approving voting systems relate to the city's ideas about developing a voting system and open source tech software, and going back repeatedly potentially for improvements as time moves forward. So there's a lot of open questions out there, and I don't think the Department of Technology wants to do a bad job. I don't think they're trying to foreclose anyone from having contributions to the knowledge base in relation to developing a voting system. But there needs to be a starting point for the city, and this person would be the starting point. And also, as I mentioned last meeting, LA has got many committees, and probably too many committees. When you look at the roster of the folks who have had input, but there's probably other groups that'll have contributions and groups will be formed that can increase the knowledge of the project manager, also contribute to the development of a voting system than just TAC, just the Elections Commission, just me, and just the Department of Technology. I think once this gets rolling, there'll be a lot of people who have a lot of good ideas to put into this. At the same time, there has to be some timeline set of when to make decisions and to move things forward. So, and that's all in the Director of Technology's mindset as she approaches this. She wants us to be successful as well. So,
I think it becomes part of that. It becomes what is the success criteria, right? And so certainly for you, Director Arntz, it's a functional system I think as the commission has stated many times, and as well as the city in the forms of various resolutions and the Board of Supervisors, is to have a transparent system that is open source as a matter of policy. So it's, I think that, and then the concern about the transparency of the actual development process itself. And I think the concern here is that somebody who is reporting just into the technology department and versus somebody reporting, for example, to you, would give more transparency to that process and assure that it's something that's both useful for you and is responsive to the policy of this commission.
I think that's a fear more than a fact, because certainly
fear. We're talking about something to avoid fear becoming fact.
Right. Because, putting it in the Department of Elections doesn't make it better, because we're not technologists. We don't have the wherewithal really to develop a voting system or to guide the development of a voting system, where I think the Department of Technology has more skill sets available and more experience with technology projects. But again, as I said, no one's saying that the project manager is going to be hidden in a closet somewhere and can't speak to people and come to meetings and have input and share drafts of documents. And that's not what's being said. I just think that the idea is that the people who have experience and the skills with large technology projects are probably going to come from the Department of Technology, more so the Department of Elections. At the same time, no one's trying to not make this successful, and certainly the Elections Commission has had many opportunities to advocate for an development open source system. The Department of Technology, the Mayor's Office, the board, I'm sure they're aware of that. So no one's trying not to make this an open process where people have contributions, and those contributions are vetted. But at the same time, we need to start getting specificity about this. There's been a lot of conversation. I know that every time someone speaks, they're very, they think they're being very precise in what they believe an open source voting system is. They're being very precise in what open source means in relation to elections in open source. From my perspective, it's all over the place. There's nothing that I can point to and say that's how we begin, that's where we start, and that's how it relates to the city's processes. So creating something with more certainty, so there's less fear, creating something that has more structure to it than just what people think ought to happen, but actually start putting down what will happen, I think actually will help things along more than what has happened so far. So I think this is a positive. It's a high-level position for the city. The Director of Technology is behind this. She's putting her time into this. So, in a couple of weeks, we'll probably get it posted. And really, if there's a fear that the right person won't get the job, then send the right person towards the job, so that the good candidates have a chance to actually apply and become the successful candidate that puts this together.
Have you seen the draft? Does it contain language about open source experience and election experience?
It does, yeah.
To your satisfaction?
I mean, again, the open source, I'm not an expert in open source.
Well, on the election part.
So I really can't. I mean, the election part, I mean, in a lot of ways, the election part is secondary to the technical aspects of this. There certainly there's a user experience, but we have, the department has one set of user experiences, but there has to be other sets of user experiences that come into this, I think, because we haven't covered all scenarios when it comes to elections. As good as we do a job of running elections, we're not, we don't have all knowledge. So we'll contribute, but it's the technology side of it that to us is more concerning than the election side. We can contribute what we know, but that's why I think it's important that the Department of Technology is in support of all this as well.
Can I say something? So I'm actually very happy with all the responsibilities that you outlined for the project manager. I mean, really, my only issue is that the Department of Elections won't be owning the project because, as Deputy City Attorney Givner said, we won't have any ability from a city's process perspective to actually affect the policy. I mean, and that's what makes the Department of Elections unique for us. And we've been involved in this project for the past 3 years.
But in a way, it's moving past policy at this point. To me, it's moving to something than just passing policies. If you want to have contributions to the specifications for a voting system, that's not a policy. With that said, there's nothing no one's thinking. There's no ideas of precluding the TAC or the commission in commenting or anyone from the public in providing input to the specifications to develop the voting system.
Well, I think the thing that we've talked the most this evening is about the this kind of core issue of whether the project should be approached incrementally versus in this monolithic approach. Like, it seems like the Department of Technology is going with Salam's direction with this more waterfall, but we're not in a position to influence that at all.
I think there's from my point of view, my vantage point as a director of elections and not a technologist, I think there's a lot of assertions and a lot of conclusions being made on really incomplete information as far as the Slalom report and what he was intending to do, and also forecasting what's going to happen next. I mean, the next step is to get a project manager who's going to think these things through and actually start to write a plan out. And I think that's a good thing. A lot of time has gone into this on the commission side. Certainly, you've had you put a lot of your personal time into this. I get that. But the city has allocated funds. There's a classification. The director of the Department of Technology is drafting the job description for this position, with the purpose of setting specifications so the city can get a sense of what it means to actually develop a open source voting system. The Slalom report is a starting point as far as I think everyone's concerned. It's not the end point, but it's a good touchstone for all involved, and that was proven tonight. Certainly, everyone's got an opinion about it. But again, the next step, and there has to be a next step, not a next everything, is to get a person to be the project manager that can start drawing together specifications. And if there's other sources of open source voting and elections information is out there, to connect with that information, bring it in, and not just talk about it, but start making some documents and start bringing that forward.
Like I said, I agree with the next step of having a project manager and all the responsibilities you outlined. My only issue, again, is that, who this person reports to. And I want to just mention one thing, so that I was going to say this later, but it very closely relates to what we're discussing now, that the resolution describes a project that's being done by the DHR right now. It's called the Hiring Modernization Project. This is a project, I would say, in a slightly bigger scale than what the Department of Election or the Open Source Voting Project. Was estimated to be between $20 to $30 million over 5 years. DHR is not the Department of Technology, but the model they're using is it's a project of DHR. And they hired a consultant who is working with their director and deputy director, once every 1 or 2 weeks they meet. And this they have monthly steering committee meetings where they involve other departments like COIT, DT, digital services, but it's still owned by the DHR. But all these other departments are assisting DHR in helping the project succeed. So this is a case where you have a department working on a project of a similar scale that's owned by that department, even though they're not the Department of Technology. So that's kind of and actually there's one other very important aspect to it, and they're actually doing it in an agile approach. They came up with a $20 to $30 million internal estimate. They didn't hire an outside consultant to come up with the estimate, and COIT gave them $1 million in seed money to actually start developing in the first year. So this is sort of like, that is kind of the direction I'd like to see this go.
Yeah, is it open source?
They're considering it, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah, I don't think it's open source, and also it's being built around PeopleSoft. So the existing there's an existing system that they don't plan on removing, and so everything they're doing is being built around an existing system to add more functionality to speed up the hiring process. So it's not apples to apples. So that the idea of seed money, I get that, but again, there's a plan with that seed money, which I don't think exists yet for the open source voting system. And I think that's what this project manager needs to start piecing together, because it doesn't exist yet, as far as the city is concerned. People can disagree with that, but when it comes to funding, if you watch the budget hearings as they go forward, there's a lot of demand for the city's funds, and there has to be very specific demands that are carved out in time to get that money. And right now, I don't think we're there. So I think that's why this is a good next step.
Commissioners, other comments, questions?
Yeah, I'm hoping to clarify something. I think I can speak for the commission when I say that we all support the idea of multiple departments and consultants being involved in making sure that we develop the best open source system and that the project manager that we hire is as successful as possible in their job. And so I'm wondering if you can articulate a little more why you think that collaborative effort would be better suited to living in the Department of Technology. If collaboration is going to happen with various actors regardless, why do you think it should be housed there as opposed to in the Department of Elections?
One, I mean, we don't have, there's no one to even talk to in the Department of Elections to bounce ideas off of when it comes to building a voting system or developing voting system components. And also partially space. As we go into the election cycle, we're not going to have space, really, literally, for a person to have a desk. And things are very fluid. And as we go into the November cycle, when this person would be coming on board, it'd be good to be there to observe the process. But I don't think trying to do any sort of studious considerations of developing a voting system. And as we come into to 2019, I mean, I guess they could come to the department, but we're just not, we couldn't support that person as far as knowledge is concerned. We couldn't support the person as far as having resources. I mean, that's all would be what the Department of Technology provides, just on the basis of its mission compared to us.
And one follow-up question there. This would be atypical, but would it be possible for a person to report to you in the Department of Elections, but be physically operating from the Department of Technology, so they could reap the benefits of having space there and being able to speak with fellow technologists, but we could maintain the accountability relationship through the Department of Elections?
Sure. I mean, that's a possibility, but again, this is bigger than the Elections Commission. This is a city project, so and I'm not being disrespectful. The city has to have input on this, and having someone reporting to me doesn't mean the Elections Commission owns the development of a voting system. It can have its input. It can have its input if the person's in DT, if it's in the mayor's office. However, so and really, I think as this goes forward, there's going to be more and more people stepping forward who want to have input on this beyond the Elections Commission.
Yeah, just for the record, I did meet with the San Francisco's Chief Digital Services Officer maybe 6 months or a year ago, and I talked about this exact issue. I actually asked her if she thought a project would be more successful being under the department that would be using the product versus outside. She said, in her experience, it's better that it be owned by the department using it. But she also made a very generous offer. She said that if the department were to have a position that they hired, she offered to have that person be physically situated within her team members to kind of bounce ideas off, like you're saying. And so it would alleviate that space issue you described.
Yeah. I mean, and again, where I think we're trying to nail things down too much right now. I mean, the next step is really to get the job description done, to get it out, to start getting people interested in the position, and then bring someone in. I mean, the dynamics of this are going to, I expect, change as time goes on. I don't expect this to be set in stone, but at least initially, the Department of Technology is getting the wheels rolling, so the city can start to set some specifications in relation to developing a voting system. You know, I mean, that's about as agile as it gets, I imagine, right? I mean, you're not trying to get it all set going forward.
Yeah, for one step at a time, yeah. But
Right.
we're looking for the long term, too. Yeah.
Okay. Other comments, commissioners, questions? We'll turn to other elements of the director's report during the director's report section. Anything else?
On the sub-item or the agenda item?
On the sub-item of the director's report. I think, again, we've discussed this extensively, so I will take any public comments on this item, 5B.
Jim Soper. I have two comments. One, I have talked to a lot of technologists or talked with them over Facebook or whatever, and security experts, and they're very good at technology. They have no clue about how to build an election system. This is way out of their, way out of their training. There's so many things with accessibility. Foreign language certification is a big one that they don't understand. There's just an awful lot of problems that they don't get. And they're saying, oh, well, I'll build one for $50,000. And so you got no clue. You know, so this is a problem. My recommendation here is you have a very good technology advisory board, and I would really push to have them included in the interview process and have them come up with their own estimates of the leading candidates. Second thing, and I'm flashing back to 30 years ago when I worked as a consultant for a very good company that produced software for expert systems. And you had to have an expert and you had to have the developer. And even in the same company, our customer, but in the same company, the expert was the customer. And I don't know if the city has things for designating somebody as the customer. That would be Mr. Arnson, the commission. Now, we could tell very early on if their project, on which they were spending millions of dollars, were going to fail or not by how close the technology people were to the customer. I'm thinking especially of one company in Switzerland where the technology guy, I asked him, well, where's your expert? He says, oh, he's next door. I said, yeah, okay, that's going to work because they're going to be communicating. So you need to ensure whatever gets set up to ensure those lines of communication between the department. I would hope that the Technology Advisory Committee gets plugged in very strongly with this, and then with you folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soper. Other members of the public?
I'd really like to relate a couple of my personal experiences. One of them was attending a Board of Supervisors budget committee hearing where the chair of the subcommittee had an item about the open source voting system. The Solemn folks presented some highlights from their report, and the director of the Department of Technology gave some highlights about how the Department of Technology would approach this. And one of the things that really impressed me about that presentation was how it seemed to be the Department of Technology didn't have very much experience with agile development, and that they were starting from scratch. And had a bunch of wonderful slides with lots of buzzwords on it, throwing out buzzword bombs that were supposedly supposed to be impressive, but really no indication at all about steps to be started. And so I did a public records request to the Department of Technology asking for their policy on development methodologies, agile policies, and waterfall approach, and kind of how do they decide which approach to do in a system for a system that they take on. And the response I got was, first of all, they don't have a policy on that. And I had somebody call me up saying, well, what are you talking about here anyway? And the explanation I got was, well, here in the Department of Technology, we don't really do big projects. Those are things, the big technology projects are things that get done into the individual departments by and large. And so we really haven't had to have this issue about do we do things with waterfall or do we do it with agile. So I'm just really concerned about where I'm hearing this project going right now. I don't see, and we've got a project here now, 2.5 years in the making, and you don't have a governance process for it. That's fundamentally the issue. Never mind that you're hiring. Finally, your 2015 resolution said the first thing you do is go out and hire a project director, project manager. And starting that now is absolutely not an example of agile development, or waterfall for that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Other members of the public?
Concerned, Brent Turner with Cavo. Concerned is not a word that I think would be appropriate at this point. I'm assuming Alan Deckert, the father of the open source voting movement, will not be considered for this position, as a couple years ago he called for the commission to terminate Director Arnst and mentioned that Mr. Arnst was beyond rehabilitation and would continue to drag his feet until this project fell apart. Nobody has mentioned that we believe there is some covert plan to delay or destroy this work, but Mr. Arnst keeps mentioning it as if someone has said that, and to the best of my knowledge, nobody has said that we suspect him of doing that, or the Department of Elections of doing that. So I'm curious where that's coming from, why he keeps repeating that. We are obviously concerned. We reject the Department of Technology receiving the can now that's kicked down the road again at this late hour. To the best of my knowledge, this is sort of new information that all of a sudden the Department of Technology is going to remove this project and eliminate oversight. It's concerning is not the word that I would use. When the experts come before the commission and say the slalom report is terminally flawed and we should get our money back, that doesn't mean that we should stand by the Slalom report. It's, at a certain point, it becomes insubordination. I think we need to take a hard look at this while you still have a chance to be involved. Get to the head of the Department of Technology, find out more, find out if you can set benchmarks. If you're not going to consider terminating Mr. Arndt's employment, then let's set benchmarks. So if this doesn't get done in a certain amount of time, then we have to get a new head of the Department of Elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Other members of the public?
To help the Commission a little bit out, I would say that the Commission already has the technical advisory committee with people who have the skills and the knowledge and the experience in open source. So if there is any kind of a job rec that is put out there or will be put out there, it's probably the best idea to leverage the knowledge and experience of Professor Wasserman and Commissioner Yerdonek, and just try to collaborate on the job requirements as well to make sure that the person who gets hired has the necessary skill set. I feel like if there is any way to help out the Commission with screening the people, I feel like it should be pretty easy to do in San Francisco, because if not here, you won't find many engaged open source software developers. So if there is any need for helping out with screening, even members of the public, such as myself, can pretty easily tell who has necessary expertise in open source or not. And just from the literature, I think overall the interdisciplinary teams are known to deliver better results. So if you have Department of Elections who is an expert in elections, and you have Department of Technology who is an expert in technology, if these two departments could work together, which I believe was proposed, where the person who is a technologist will be able to communicate freely with Department of Elections and get all the necessary feedback, this will be for sure beneficial. And that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koschek. Any other comments? Seeing none, let's move on to the next item, unless there's other comments on that item. Okay. Ohio use of Prime 3. I put this in as Mr. Turner, member of the public, sent in 3 items on the use of a system that he has mentioned before in our meetings called Prime 3, a open source voting system. This is in the in our agenda pack under item 5. I wanted to include it because it had been forwarded by him. I further did some research based on this, and my reading of these documents indicate that Prime 3, as used in New Hampshire and in Ohio, is for the purposes of ballot marking and is an open source system and is used in actual elections. So I just wanted to include that further information there. And since Mr. Turner is here and sent this, I will just ask if he wishes to make any comments on this.
Awkwardly, I will say yes.
I should have said you should wait.
Thank you. Just that, yes, recently Ohio did certify this. Dr. Gilbert is looking for some counties that want to participate in Ohio with him. Interestingly, the certification board that handles Ohio is also a certifier for the state of California. Groups like Verified Voting have now endorsed this particular system. When Director Arntz talks about the certification process being an unknown, my conversations with people involved in the California certification process is that this is not, again, rocket science. Certifying an open source election system is no more difficult than their regular certification process. So we're looking forward to having this system come toward California. Again, I would suggest having Dr. Gilbert come here, speak to the commission. He's available, very nice person, very easygoing, and glad to present any and all information that might be helpful in us moving forward. So when we talk about how fantastic this all is and all these unknowns, the fact is little old New Hampshire just decided to do it and did it. It's scalable to San Francisco. This is not rocket science. It's easily accomplished. That's why we're befuddling all the experts that come before you, because they don't understand what all the confusion is about. You just do it. And the sooner you start, the sooner you finish. Thank you.
Mr. Turner, just one quick question. I just want to understand, when I read this, and what I've seen online is that Prime 3 is for ballot marking, correct? It doesn't do tabulation.
The tabulation piece is accomplished. So it's not in New Hampshire currently, and we're pushing for New Hampshire to bring that in to make it a complete system. But per Dr. Gilbert, that tabulation system is available.
So
completed and available.
Okay. So
the ranked choice voting piece would be an extra piece, and we're speaking to people that are in the process of doing ranked choice voting tabulation, and hopeful that they'll go with GPL and make that open source as well.
I see.
Okay,
thank you.
Mr. Turner, could you email the URL to the repository for that code, the tabulation piece?
Sure, I'll ask Dr. Gilbert to do that.
Thanks.
Assuming they haven't run away from GitHub because Microsoft just acquired them. Yes, thank you.
Other questions? And since we've opened it to Mr. Turner, any other members of the public wish to speak on this item?
At the risk of, well, now I'm held to 3 minutes. That's good. One of the things that has struck me as we've thought about this is that this project has many of the elements of a startup. It's poorly funded, it's understaffed, it's challenged to get something out there for people to use as soon as possible. It's a release early, release often kind of approach where you create a project plan that identifies which components are going to be in each release. And we can learn a lot from work that's been done in how startups work. In fact, there's a very nice book called The Startup Owner's Manual, and one of the principles of it is get out of the building. And the lesson from there is that the technologists don't know the domain in which they're working. They don't have the expertise, and they have to go to the people who have the expertise. They have to go out there and talk to the people who have so-called pain points, whether those are the voters themselves or the people who tabulate the votes or the people who deal with provisional ballots. There are a lot of stakeholders in a project like this, and as you put together a roadmap for what you want to do, then the people that you need to talk to differ over time. And so I suggest that as we write this job description, that perhaps some of the characteristics of a startup approach would have a good place in there, because somebody who's done this kind of thing before, not being part of a huge corporation or a mid-sized consulting firm, but out there as a two-person startup, many of those lessons will be very relevant for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wasserman. Any other members of the public or any questions? Okay. On to the last item regarding the resolution. Commissioner Jurdonic, this was your submission, so if you'd like to...
Sure, but just before I speak about the resolution, I wanted to kind of make my report, and I'll just be very quick. There's 5 or 6 bullets here. First, on the Technical Advisory Committee on the results report component that Member Wasserman mentioned, that's actually still being worked on, but what happened is that Sunday night it was made public, so people can watch, as it's being developed. We're only allowed to have 2 people work on it at a time, though, which is kind of hampers things because of the Sunshine Ordinance. But also, at the last meeting, we had voted for the application period to be open for the committee, and I haven't gotten to that yet. but I'll try to do that before the next meeting. We've got until mid-August before Member Buffindo's seat has to be vacated. The other news is that, as I mentioned earlier, in the first week of June, the California Clean Money issued a press release that puts several supervisors on the record as wanting to work towards fully funding this project. And I'm just going to read one sentence of Supervisor London Breed's quote. She said that, "If elected mayor, I will actively work with Supervisor Cohen, other elected leaders, and supporters to make local city funds available for the Elections Commission's request to start building an open source system, and will continue to work to get funds to fully develop the system, an investment that will dramatically reduce our costs in future elections." So I think this is a huge change for us. It really, this is going to be the first time that we ever had a mayor that has made a statement like that. So I think things can be different next year. And there were similar statements from Supervisor Kim, incoming Supervisor Mandelman, as well as Supervisor Cohen. So Director Arntz had mentioned that LA County had awarded their contract for their own voting system to Smartmatic, and there's another company. And the thing I wanted to mention about this is that they also issued this document. It's something like 450 pages long, but it said in there that they're actually kind of allowing for a for-profit model to be used for their system, which would mean that they could actually sell their system. So they said that if they're not able to create a nonprofit within a certain number of years, it's going to revert to a for-profit system. So this just shows that it's not necessarily an open source system. The Secretary of State issued a press release about the $134 million to be awarded to counties collectively, and it did mention that it could be used for open source voting. I think this is the first time that the Secretary of State has ever had an official statement mentioning open source. In the past, it has always been phrased as publicly owned, which is different. And another related piece of news is that I saw a headline a few days ago saying that Mayor Farrell's citywide internet project has been kind of put on hold. And this was a $1.7 billion project. So I think that having that happen means that maybe there will be more technology funds available. So that covers my updates, and then as you all know, there's a resolution and it's part of today's packet, and this is something that I worked on with President Donaldson and also Commissioner Hill. Were the two people that gave me feedback on it and reviewed it. And this is an outgrowth of the discussion we had at the last meeting, where we were starting to learn the beginnings of how this project could be transferred away from the Department of Elections, and also that we had started to kind of verbalize more some of our dissatisfaction with Solemn's report. And the way that this resolution is currently phrased, it does things like asks the city administration to name the Department of Elections as the owner for this project, so that the public will have a channel for oversight and transparency and visibility into the project. It also says that the city leaders should restate their commitment to actually doing this, so that we can actually say that we're past the point where the city is just still thinking about developing it. And there's a few other resolve clauses at the end that you can take a look at. And so it doesn't go so far as to reject the Solemn report completely, but it does reject the cost estimates and the waterfall approach that they described. So I think it's sort of a middle ground where we can still use it as a resource, but we're not necessarily saying that we completely disagree.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdonic. Yes, and I reviewed this and provided some input to Commissioner Jurdonic. I feel that this is at this juncture, as we're looking at hiring someone, the feedback on the Slalom report, et cetera, that this is an important time to make this kind of a statement. And so I'm in favor of this. Commissioner Hill, anything or no? So I would like to ask if there is a motion on this resolution.
I motion to adopt the resolution.
Have a second?
I'll second.
Comments, questions? Okay, any comments or questions or comments by the members of the public?
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Carey. I do encourage the adoption of Commissioner Johnick's resolution. It sets important and much-needed direction to the open source project, a direction that is needed to rescue the project from its past moribund pace and ineffective performance. Something that, as my understanding, has been largely a result of it being treated as a city-driven project rather than a commission, something with significant direct commission oversight. So this resolution sets resolution sets a direction for those needed changes that allow you to recover your proper independence and to guide better implementation of a policy the Commission has already set. I do recommend one substantive change, and that is to remove from page 7, line 23, the insistence on using the slalom report. Just delete the words "the slalom report" and adjust punctuation accordingly so the line starts just as "use TAC in other departments." Leaving in the reference to the slalom report leaves open a door that ought to be more firmly closed. Removing that language is more aligned with the statement from the OSV TAC. Removing that language does not prevent anyone from looking at the report, but it avoids an ambiguous invitation to rely on the report in ways that are not warranted. Don't enable resistance to the change that is needed. For those who think that there's something useful in the slalom report, my challenge to you is, what is it in the slalom report that is significantly valuable, that isn't just kind of general software development or system development best practices already, that really inform how to proceed or what the costs were in a credible way, that wasn't already a part of your 2015 or wasn't part of the input to your 2015 resolution. There's very little there. There's very little there. And I think it's best to move forward in some different directions that are outlined in this resolution. Thank you.
Brent Turner with CAVO. We align ourselves with the previous comments and support the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner and Mr. Carey. Any other comments by the public?
I believe that the startup analogy to deliver this project is quite accurate. I believe so. I was a poll worker as well this time, and I was in one of the low-income housing buildings in San Francisco on Ellis Street. And it seems like the good way to deliver this system, or at least figure out if the prototype that would be delivered meets the needs, is to essentially try to use it in limited number of polling places. I feel like that's an example of a good incremental approach. You risk maybe less efficient way of doing things in 2, 3, 4 polling places. But at least in the place where I was, it was only 100 people who came. Risk of the system not working the first time is quite likely very small. The results won't be subverted because you can always fall back to pure paper-based voting. And this is one of the approaches where you could think about. Essentially, the prototype gets deployed to a limited number of polling places, and over the next 2-3 elections, this system will come to the point where it will match the quality and results with what city gets from the commercial vendor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kosia. And thank you for being a poll worker. Any other members of the public?
I do have some.
This isn't working. Jim Soper, I support the resolution.
Okay. Commissioner Jung?
Yeah, no, I support the resolution. Can I ask some clarifying questions about some of the wording here? Some of the whereas clauses, but I'll start with the operative portion of the motion. So finally resolved is your last on page 8, last paragraph. It reads, finally resolved that the commission encourages the Department of Elections to continue its best practices of working collaboratively with other departments, DOT included. Can you clarify a little bit what that means to you, and specifically what that means in the context of our department being supportive of Department of Technology owning the project management piece of this development?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the very last part you said?
Yeah, so what does it mean in light of what we just heard?
Well, the purpose of this clause in my mind was to say, by naming the Department of Elections as the project owner, we're not saying that we want to cut out the other departments in the city. We actually want the department to be working with other departments, and we want other departments to be involved. So it's kind of clarifying that we still want this to be a collaborative citywide effort, but within that, we want it to be owned by the Department of Elections. And this is following the model of this hiring modernization project I mentioned, where it's led by DHR, but they have a steering committee made up of a number of departments for a more citywide effort.
Okay, and just quickly here, I'll just run through a couple of clarifications in the whereas clauses. Page 2, first full paragraph, whereas, second sentence, starting at line 4, you say, issued the RFP for the business case was stipulated that any contractor, I think you mean, condition or requirement, but I'm not sure what you meant by stipulated.
You want to just say required that?
Sure.
Okay.
Page 6, first full paragraph, whereas Department of Elections work on the open source voting system project has been heavily reliant on subject to the direction from the mayor's office. I understand you're, probably referencing a prior mayor. I don't know which mayor you're talking about, but I wonder what you're trying to achieve with that paragraph and whether you can phrase it in a way that isn't suggestively pejorative. Next, the 2 paragraphs down from that, whereas significant efforts and progress have been made by the California Clean Money Campaign in conjunction with some of the San Francisco elected officials to provide for the state matching funds. Just not clear what you mean by that, less important, but those are my comments on the whereases.
Well, the one referencing the mayor's office, I'll tell you the intent of that clause, and then we can talk about how to reword it. But the intent behind it was that up to this point, because the mayor never named, or whoever's funding the project has never named an owner of the project, it's never been clear whose responsibility it is to make forward progress. And this is kind of like saying, but in the absence of a project owner, I think Director Arntzen in many meetings was saying that, well, he's meeting with the mayor's budget office, and it's kind of whatever they want to do. And I would probably be okay with striking this if we can't come up with wording, but it was just to illustrate, well, in the absence of a clear accountability, it was kind of hard to pin down who's responsible for doing what. The reason that we did the Solemn Report in the first place was actually the mayor's office.
I understand what you're saying.
And then on the other one, that is a reference to how Assembly Member Chu and State Senator Wiener had offered to sign a letter and make a formal budget request for $8 million in matching funds. And that was led by California Clean Money. So that is just kind of a nod to how there are possibilities for getting funding at the state level.
Okay. I would suggest you, since you might be working with some of the same staff members of the mayor's office, the way you phrase that first paragraph on page 6, I suggest you strike it.
Just strike it completely? Okay. I'm okay with that. What about the other paragraph?
Fine.
Okay.
Can you comment on the comment by Mr. Carey about removing the reference to the slalom report from page 7?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I agree with Mr. Carey that it does send mixed signals when we have that in there. I would be okay with removing it, but the only reason I had it in there was I feel like I don't want to send the message that we should, well, I don't want to send the message that you're not allowed to look at it or something, but if people are okay with removing, I would be happy to remove it.
It doesn't preclude somebody from looking at it, to Mr.
Right.
Carey's point. So I just think that.
Yeah, then are people okay with removing it? Okay.
So that's removing the slalom report, comma, from that,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Would it be worth including another line encouraging the project director to seek out additional resources and information? I mean, it's sort of to be expected, but if you want to emphasize that this is not an exclusive list, I'm sure we could add another line making that case without specifically referencing the slalom report.
So kind of like an including but not limited to type of phrasing?
Yeah.
How about changing the word "as" to "among the"? So it would be use the TAC and other departments among the resources, including blah, blah, blah.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it one more time? You said use TAC and...
In other departments among their resources, including learning from.
Sure.
And let me just say thank you. Must have taken an incredible amount of work, and I thought it was really well written. Thank you to you, and thank you to whoever provided the comments.
Thank
Very
you.
impressive.
It was a lot of work, but thank you.
Other comments or requested markups? Can we, I'm sorry to make you do this, Commissioner Jordanic, but can we go through by page and line what the modifications are, please?
Sure. So in order, on page 2, line 4, to replace stipulated by required. So which required that? Any contractor? Page 6, strike the first whereas clause, whereas Department of Elections work on the open source voting system.
So which, can you?
The first whereas clause in page 6.
Row 1 and 2, right?
Yeah, lines 1 and 2.
Yep.
And then we were going to keep the third whereas clause the same.
Okay.
At the bottom of page 7, line 23 would be changed to use TAC and other departments among the resources, including.
Okay.
And was that it? Commissioner Hill, did you say something, or?
No, that captures it.
Okay. Any other discussion, commissioners? Secretary Chan, would you take the roll, please? Or
Yeah.
roll, vote.
President Donaldson?
Yes.
Donaldson, yes. Vice President Mogi?
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Hill, yes. Commissioner Jordanic?
Yes.
Jordanic, yes. Commissioner Jung?
Yes.
Jung, yes. Commissioner Rowe?
Yes.
Rowe, yes. Unanimous. Motion carries.
Thank you. I would like to make one other motion, and that would be that we request Commissioner, well, I don't know if we need a motion on this, but that Commissioner Jurdonic actually request a meeting with the director, is she? Jurul, to convey this resolution and to discuss the concerns that the commission has had with the solemn report and a governance model that will assure the transparency, the governance, and for that matter, a reporting model that would assure that transparency that we've been discussing.
Is that it's a motion?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
And don't you want to add to that? You guys painstakingly contemplated a advocacy model here that specifically suggests meetings with the mayor's office, finding a sponsor in the board of supervisors. I would suggest you expand that motion.
Okay, friendly amendment?
Friendly or not, it's an amendment.
So I feel like this is more, really what we want is we want the mayor's office to kind of name the owner. So how would meeting with the director?
I think there was discussion earlier about a governance model, for example, right? And the reporting relationship of the project manager, which is, of course, in the resolution itself. But I think that actually going and meeting, and yes, maybe it should be the mayor's office and Director Jurul.
So you mean kind of to get her buy-in into having Department of Elections?
Well, so we're not just passing this and we post it to our website and hope somebody looks at it.
Are we submitting this to any of these departments or the mayor's office and other departments so that they do actually receive it? We can make sure that at the very minimum, I agree with the meeting aspect, but I do think that all parties or, folks that you've mentioned actually receive this, not just get posted onto a website. Because that's a simple act, easy.
Sure. Well, then maybe I withdraw my motion and remake that motion to say that we put a cover letter on this and send it to the Office of the Mayor, the Department of Technology, the Director of Technology, and the
board.
And the board. Okay. As a commission, and with a cover letter that says we passed this resolution and would like to see these things implemented, and then additionally to request Commissioner Jurdonic to initiate meetings with the Director of Technology, of the Department of Technology, and the Mayor's Office. Or maybe that's a separate resolution. Let me withdraw that part and just talk about the cover letter.
I kind of think you all have experience in advocacy. It kind of depends on, what you think will be effective, and if you think slapping a cover letter and forwarding a resolution off to, I'm just not sure. I would rather kind of empower you as yourself, the president of the commission, or your designee, to take steps to effectuate our resolution, including but not limited to reaching out to Director Jurel, Mayor's Office, Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
And that way you can, rather than being limited to one specific communication channel, you can use your relationships and your contacts as you see fit to set up the most persuasive advocacy strategy.
Okay. Can we make that a motion? And I would like to actually make it a motion we vote on, because then this would carry the weight of the actual commission, basically.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Well, I'm now confused what the motion was.
Would you like to restate?
Sure, I'll try. I move to empower President Donaldson or his designee to take the steps necessary to effectuate the Commission's open source voting systems resolution number 2 passed today, including but not limited to communicating with, meeting with Director Jurel, the mayor, the mayor's office, and members of the Board of Supervisors and their staff.
Does that clarify it?
Yeah, I'm just, I'm just reading this resolution, and it does say the finally resolved is like, you know, to work collaboratively with all these departments listed, and it just seems, I mean, I support this motion, but my rationale behind the cover letter to send something over is that you don't want to be kind of like, this is like a first step of actually working collaboratively, and like, I just want to make sure that step would also be taken, because there's a bunch of people that are listed here and departments, and if we really want to make this work, then, you know, setting this resolution, making sure that hopefully they read it is an important first step.
Okay. If I may, and suggest that taking that under advisement, that would help. That would be a step to fully try to effectuate this, which would include that letter as well as meeting. But I think that the point of Commissioner Jung, as I take it, is that to do what's necessary to get this done, including a cover letter.
Phrase it as "get it done." Period.
I mean, we've sort of, I feel like it, I mean, a few years ago, we kind of passed a similar resolution where we just blanket authorized the president to kind of, to do what they need to do to advance the project, right?
Yes.
I mean, this seems like it falls under that.
Sure, but I think that with the motion's been,
Sure.
we've got a second, so if
Yeah.
we can just vote on that, I think it double assures that this will be representing the wishes of the commission. So, Commissioner.
Before we move on, I'd like to make a
Yes.
slight amendment, just to say the commission president, rather than President Donaldson, so that
Yes,
if
commission
next year you're
president.
not the president, whoever is the president can
Very
continue
good.
on with that project.
Good, thank you. Actually, we need to take public comment. Any public comment on this item, or this motion?
I suspect my amendment needs to be seconded.
I second that.
Seeing no members of the public, Secretary Chan, please call the roll.
Before I do, could you tell me who the second was for the original motion? Was that you?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Hill.
Thank you. Okay. On the resolution, President Donaldson.
Yes.
Donaldson, yes. Vice President Mogi.
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill.
Yes.
Hill, yes. Commissioner Judonic.
Yes.
Judonic, yes. Commissioner Jung.
Yes.
Jung, yes. Commissioner Rowe.
Yes.
Rowe, yes. This is unanimous. Motion carries.
Very good. Next item.
Item 6, Commissioners' Reports. Commissioner reports on topics not covered by another item on this agenda. Meetings with public officials, oversight and observation activities, long-range planning for commission activities, and areas of study, proposed legislation which affects the elections.
So, if you don't mind, I'll just I'll start and I'll try and make it fast. I was a poll worker and inspector in precinct 1103. We had 147, though we counted 148. I believe we had 147 voters, though the roster. We had to recount it many times. In any case, it was, as usual, a very good experience to actually go out and have the training and then actually execute. There were some other observations which I will write up, and when we go over the official results, I'll discuss them more next month.
I met with Director Arntz at the Department of Elections between our last meeting and today. He was kind enough to give me a tour of the department. I got to meet a lot of the staff members and see how ballots were being processed in the lead up to the election. We also discussed opportunities to expand our outreach to certain voter communities in San Francisco.
I also was a poll worker for the first time as an inspector. And I also recruited a friend to join me. So
Very good.
And it was really great. I think the training went really well. We even were, Director Arntz and I were walking around and met the chief of staff to the sheriff's department. And she said, she was just giving praises about how smooth the basement level was going. And she's like, I think you need to train other departments on customer service. And I even want to ask you if you've ever even done that kind of, like if you ever even worked with other contractors or anyone else on your customer service, because it was just remarkable. I think it went really smooth. People were so excited. I mean, even during the training, to even articulate almost like every slide how you are, as a poll worker, you are here to help, citizens exercise their right to vote. So be very excited about that. Like that being very repetitive and creating that culture, I think was just every single person that I worked with in my at my polling site was just kind of kept with that kind of attitude and culture that was just kept up. And so I definitely commend you for running such a great election. And it was definitely a long day. I ended up counting multiple times, and I think I was the one that made that one small error about like one ballot. And so I'm like, it was very frustrating, but it was, a good lesson learned. So congratulations, thank you so much, and it was really wonderful to be able to participate.
And I'd also like to commend the director and the department. I checked the website on the 6th day after the election, 9 a.m., saw the RCV tallies, spreadsheet, a whole host of useful information. Then around, I think it was 10:30, a little bit before that, saw an email kind of explaining where the department was very clearly, and every day subsequent to that, saw a nice summary with updated tables and information. So wanted to commend kind of the clarity and of the communication.
I'd like to echo that. It was so easy to follow the development of the ballot counting post-election, and just personally, I saw multiple people in my social network share information that was coming directly from the department, which I think is atypical. Usually city government information is not shared that widely. So I was really impressed. Great work.
Yeah, so I was a poll worker. I also made it to City Hall on election night after I worked the polls, which I'd never done before. So I got to see the last announcement. There's only like 4 or 5 people there at that point. But, and actually Director Arntz helped me get in the building. I happened to be trying to get in at the exact time, and the deputies wouldn't let me in. And I didn't have my badge. So I watched the random selection online, which I wasn't able to get to the City Hall in time, but it seemed like there were a lot of people watching it, maybe like 10 people, which is a lot more than in the past, the dice roll. Oh, your staff, okay. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, and then, we had a great tour of the department by one of your staff members, Gregory Slocum, so thank you for having, giving him to us for that period of time. And yeah, I agree. All the daily updates were very informative. Every day, like clockwork, I got an email explaining all the ballots that had been counted. And I also want to commend you for an election that had so much scrutiny and was in a lot of headlines. I thought you did an excellent job, and no hiccups that I could notice, really. So, thanks.
Yes. Any other commission reports? And yes, it was a great, so as usual, a great experience. And just to echo that, very, from everything we know so far, very well run election. And I presume we won't find out anything in addition, but we'll look forward to the final reports. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, next item.
Item
Secretary
7,
Chan.
Director's Report. Director's Report on topics not covered by another item on this agenda.
Yeah, I could just take questions on my report. I have nothing more really to add.
Yeah. So, where'd it go? 6, here it is. So, Director Arntz, do you know what the allocation of funds will be from the state's $134 million?
No, the Secretary of State's office expects to issue a memo to the counties that would detail the allocation calculations, if not the amounts available to each county within the next few weeks.
Do you know if it's based on population, or is it based on registered voters, or?
Based on registration. Yeah,
Okay.
the size of the county is based on registration. It'll be a similar model that was used in 2004, was it, when Prop 41, and
Right.
then 2006 when HAVA monies came out.
Mm-hmm.
So the money was divided by the percentage of registration of the state's total registration base.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we got about $12 million. So it'll be much less this time. It's only 143 versus, I can't remember the amount. I think it was double that earlier in the 2000s. So I think it'd be like around $2-3 million, if I did my math correctly, if they'd use the same formula.
Okay, great. And so the monies can be used, for those who haven't read this, the monies can be used for developing a system, but they must be certified by 2023, and that's in the law.
Or the counties must repay the cash.
Or they must repay. Right. Okay.
But you can still get the money, but if you don't get it certified by, was it March 2023, then the cities must return the funds.
Right.
Are you going to be using that? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Are you going to be using that for the open source project or for the interim system?
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the same pot, so.
Okay.
Glad you said you were kidding for the record.
Director Arntz, I'm just going to all the way to the end of your report that just in terms of the Budget and Finance Committee hearing, was there any discussion on the 14th of the open source monies with the Budget and Finance Committee?
No, I was asked about the security of the next system, the next Dominion system. So I explained about the posting of the ballot images and providing an application the public can use to tally results using those images that are posted online, but also about developing an open source post-election risk-limited auditing tool that the public could contribute to, as well as that the city could use to verify that the results are what they seem to be. And yeah, so that I wasn't asked any questions specifically about open source voting systems last week.
And did you bring that up by any chance?
No, I did. Yeah, the departments provided a 5 to 7 minute presentation, and then part of the presentation was future programs and initiatives, and I think we had 4 or 5 slides, and in 2 or 3 of those slides we referenced the development of an open source voting system. So
okay, great. And tomorrow, the 21st, is the follow-up. Is there what is the nature of that?
So it was a little bit different this year. So the first budget hearing consisted of the departments providing a description of their mission and what the departments intend to use their funding for going forward, with some basic comparisons of funds amongst fiscal years. And so the last fiscal year, next fiscal year, then the second fiscal year. So we just made some simple pie charts and put that up in some bar graphs. And then tomorrow morning, the budget hearing will be for the departments to respond to the budget analysts' cuts of the department's budgets. And the budget analysts recommended a cut of, I think, $140,000 from the department, which we can take, which we've absorbed because there's some maintenance that we don't have to pay for in relation to the sorting machine, and also we can take less in postage for next fiscal year. So it's not going to affect our operation. So the first budget hearing was for departments to provide a description of themselves, the description of their funding amongst 3 years, and then tomorrow will be about in relation to the budget analysts' cuts, if the departments agree or not to those cuts. I've already indicated that the Department of Elections agrees with the cuts. We can absorb them. So we'll go first in the morning, then the departments who have disagreements will go later in the day, and that'll take more time. I expect that my presentation will be very short. I'll say I agree. Potentially, I might get questions about open source, but nothing's been indicated to me that I'll be receiving any questions.
Okay. Other commissioners?
I just had a couple real quick questions about the open source. I meant to ask these at an earlier meeting, but a few months ago you had said you were going to be meeting with the city attorney's office to review licensing issues around open source, and I was wondering if you could kind of describe what happened with that, whether
I prefer not to, since I met with the city attorney, Let me say no right now.
Okay.
And come back to that later.
Is Deputy City Attorney Givner coming back, or?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to divulge client
Yeah,
confidentiality.
right, okay. And then similarly, you had also said you were going to meet with the, I forget what they're called, the Department of Risk Management.
And I did.
Yeah, what was?
Yeah, so risk management, the initial view of risk management of the city developing an open source voting system, the hit would be more into the integrity of the elections process and the public's view of its elections process. Then there would be a financial hit because since it would be a paper-based system, of course there would be a cost of hand counting those ballots, so that would be initial cost. But there would be no one would not gain office. There would be no measure that was not properly considered if the system failed, because the ballots were cast on paper. The department could gather together the ballots, hand count them, and provide results so people could gain offices and measures could be considered. So the main thing would be the integrity of the election process and people's viewpoint of their elections department, essentially, in conducting elections if it failed.
So you're saying the point would be that because you have a paper ballot, it would just be more of a perception issue that it's taking longer and...
Beyond the hand count cost, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. And then are you meeting further with them or?
Yeah, I mean, certainly as things go forward, that's what I'm saying. There's going to be a lot of people involved in developing the voting system. But yeah, certainly the city attorney's office, risk management, we'll bring them back into it as we go forward. So.
Okay, thanks.
Any other commissioner comments or questions?
Yeah, could you speak a little more about the efforts to conduct extensive outreach through community-based organizations, city agencies, the school district, and the Language Accessibility Advisory Committee to build awareness of the non-citizen suffrage provision in the school board election? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's been ongoing. We've already had initial contact. So one of the I guess big things that have happened in relation to Prop N for outreach is the board allocated, I think it's $150,000 to create a grant to fund outreach at the community level for nonprofit or advocacy organizations. And the RFP for that grant was issued by the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs, OCEIA, and IA. And Chinese for Affirmative Action was a recipient of that grant. And now Chinese for Affirmative Action is now in the process of drawing together its pool of organizations that will assist in the ground level, person-to-person interactions with potential voters, beyond what the Department of Elections can conduct. And we'll interact with CAA on how to do registration drives. We'll provide the content, like FAQs. We'll provide the registration affidavit. We'll provide information on the elections process. So that's already started. A lot of that. July 16th is when the big kickoff will occur. That's when the department will issue the registration affidavit for people to register to vote for under Prop N for school board elections. And then we'll just do what we always do for elections. We have a list of contacts for community organizations. We always try to invite ourselves to their functions. We provide content to them to post on their walls. We provide content to include in the newsletters. We offer tablings at their site. So we'll do all that. And then also we'll do mailers out to folks. So it'll be a multifaceted outreach. And also on our website, we'll develop a contact list for potential voters to use in relation to their concerns about their residency or immigration status if they were to vote under Prop N. And we'll also work with OCEIA on that, since they have a similar content on their website. So we'll partner with other departments, organizations, and get that word out. We've already, during the June cycle, I had many conversations with a lot of the non-English media, because it'll be really important in getting the word out to folks. and also giving them the heads up. And also English. There's one of the main TV stations that is interested in this. So we'll start to get this out in the larger media circles beyond just what the department normally does. So.
As I mentioned at the last meeting, I know that the school board is interested in partnering with us more. So if you identify opportunities for members of the school board to play a larger personal role in these outreach efforts, I would just urge you to communicate those opportunities to them or to me, and I can communicate to the folks that I know there. Yeah.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple more things that I just remembered. At the last meeting, I mentioned that the TAC was interested in the possibility of having scanned ballot images for some small number. And does it look like that would be possible, or?
I forgot. Yeah, so I don't want to touch the ballots until after I've certified.
Yeah, that's the understanding.
Then after the 5-day period for a request for recount has passed. Who knows? I don't expect the recount to be requested at this point. I certainly did last week at this time. But so once that happens, then I'll have to bring the ballots back to City Hall and scan them, and I'll probably get a sheriff's escort and do all that and film it and everything, so people know what I was doing with those ballots. They didn't think that we were taking ballots from the warehouse to City Hall for anything, even though the election's been certified.
Because you don't have a scanner down there at the
right.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And everything's already been shipped down to the warehouse because we had to gather the cards up for the 1% manual tally. So yes, I haven't forgotten, and yes, I'll give it probably. Yeah, I'll give it to you, and you can go from there. So
Great. And then since he's back, then there's a question about.
Can I ask him not at a public meeting, actually?
Okay. Sure.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other commissioner discussion, questions for Director Arntz? I just want to say, because this is where we actually had this in the packet, so thank you, Director Arntz, for providing the preliminary IRIS, VBM, EDGE, and PV reports. I found it interesting, by the way. I just did a gross count of pages between this and the presidential election, and the actual number of pages of the IRIS report is almost the same. It was 68 pages, and this is 62. So I'll be interested and look forward to reading through some of the details here to understand what went on. It's kind of surprising because of the difference in turnout, that there was as many issues reported.
Oh, we had a 20-some% turnout at the polls. There's a lot of activity out there.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, compared to the presidential, what was the difference between? Do you remember what the turnout was for presidential?
it was higher the presidential. I don't remember the number, but 20% is pretty good at the 4-card ballot. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a typical election day. There's nothing really.
Nothing particularly. Okay.
Surprising, at least for me. You know, when I went through it.
Okay.
What was the number of the conditional voter the same day?
Just under 1,500. Yeah. And I think all but 4 we could count because they didn't register or vote in another county.
Huh.
So.
Terrific. Okay. Any public comment on the director's report?
Item number 8.
We have a, sorry. Secretary Shannon. Yes.
Brent Turner with Cavo. Yeah, I missed a couple of the jokes. I didn't understand about the money that's coming from the Secretary of State. There was a joke made about that money not going toward an open source system, but rather being used for Dominion. So I just I didn't get the humor. I didn't know if there was a joke or what that exactly meant. But regardless, when we talk about Dominion, just to reiterate, which I think everybody here knows, there's zero accountability, zero security on the Dominion system that we're going to be leasing. So that is well known in the scientific community. Just to reiterate that those systems are laughable when it comes to security. So in other words, we have no idea what happened with the election, if the counts were right or not. Regarding ballot imaging, I would suggest taking the scanner to the ballots rather than bringing the ballots to the scanner. Just a thought. I don't know. I didn't really catch that part either. And risk limiting ballot imaging has been brought up with some legislative attempts recently, and my understanding is it's been sort of laughed out of the room, that it's a non-starter. Maybe Mr. Soper can enlighten us more about ballot imaging, but my understanding is with some legislative attempts that have occurred, it's a non-starter. Risk limiting audits will not take the place of a proper election system first count, and it is stipulated in the scientific communities that the systems that were going to be spending the money that's coming from the Secretary of State, if I caught that right and it wasn't a joke of some sort, that those systems again are incapable of appropriate security. So I'm confused on if there was a joke there. I don't think the kids that are being put in cages are thinking any of this is funny. Maybe the hour is just late for me. Thank you.
So to clarify, I believe the comment was had to do with whether the money that would be coming from the state, that would be applied to.
Yes.
Yes, and the expectation is that they would be going towards open source.
Are you saying my expectation or his
Well, I think
expectation?
that was the point of the comment.
His comment or my comment?
Your comment earlier.
Do you want me to elaborate? Are you asking me to elaborate? No.
Just to clarify, I think that when it comes to the money from the state, that we are expecting that to be used as towards funding for open source.
Well, no, the point I was making is that if the state is going to give us on the order of $3 million, if the city has to pay, up to $14 million for the Dominion system, we're going to need to spend at least $3 million anyways. So it would be better to use the money from the state for that system, because if it's towards the open source system, there is a chance of us losing all of the money if there's some part of the system isn't built by the deadline. Is that?
Got it.
So.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Okay. No other public comment. Secretary Chan, next item, please.
Item 8, Commission Social Media Additional Channel. Discussion and possible action regarding the Commission creating an account on the online publishing platform called Medium.
Commissioner Jordanic, this was your item? Or was it Commissioner Hill? I'm sorry.
I thought it was you also. I'm happy to.
Okay,
speak
well,
about
it was part of our joint thing.
Well, I think the original idea here had been that the op-ed draft that we had been working on was longer than the typical length that gets published by the San Francisco Chronicle. So we had a conversation about, well, maybe we could publish a longer version on an Elections Commission-owned social media channel like Medium, which is just a kind of a public blogging platform. Then we managed to get that op-ed down to a smaller size, but the thought had, entered into our heads. This would actually be a good way for the commission to be able to publish statements, information generally to the public, not in a format that is a little easier to read than a typical kind of press release that ends up just on our website that people don't really come into contact with. Medium is if you haven't used it, it's a really attractive platform. It makes sharing really easily. It makes sharing very easy for people. And then also there are analytics on the back end so that we could see how many people have viewed things that we're putting out into the world, which would be useful information for all of us. So the idea is just to create an account on the platform for the Elections Commission to be able to use in the future if we have information that we would like to put out directly to the public.
Is there any fee for publishing?
No, it's free. I believe they do have a premium model, but we wouldn't need that.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
I do have one question, this for the city attorney. Is there the equivalent, under the Sunshine Act for us to have a consent calendar? So items like that, great idea. I don't think any single one of us is going to say no to something like that, but we have obligations under city ordinance and state law. Can we have a consent calendar where we place items that no one is going to object to and not spend time on it?
You can have a consent calendar. You need to take public comment, but you could take action on it.
But we could take it en masse and not have to, take public comment on, something like opening up a social media account.
Right.
Yeah, okay. I see
Future
us do
reference.
that.
Thank you, Commissioner Jung.
But does this mean that the consent calendar would just have one item on it, so we wouldn't really save time, or?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we can put more of this stuff under consent and not,
Okay.
Uh,
If there's any other discussion or motion?
So I just want to clarify that as of now, we wouldn't actually be publishing on Medium, but it's just sort of an administrative
Creating an
step
account.
towards saving time for later.
I guess one question would be, who would administer it? Would it be our secretary, or would it be the president, or who would be the suggested person that would be the administrator with the passwords and all that?
I think we just delegated you a whole lot of power a couple motions ago, so.
How do we do this for other social media accounts?
Can I comment? So we have a Twitter account and a YouTube account, and a while back we had voted that any commissioner can have access to the passwords if they wanted, and I think we have a Google spreadsheet that people can have access to if they want. So, but normally, I think the secretary just, you're mainly the one that posts, right?
Currently, we use the YouTube and the Twitter to do the postings of the audios on the media, of the meetings.
Yeah. And then I was using it before you came on board.
So we just use the same model? Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Secretary Chan, if you'd call the roll. Oh, public comment. Yes. Any public comment?
David Carey here. I'll just note that in addition to the kind of the logistics of dealing with Twitter and YouTube, that you also have a policy about what kinds of things should be posted to Twitter. My sense about Medium is that that's kind of a different kind of platform, that you wouldn't be just sending out kind of messages, we're having a meeting next month, that sort of thing. So in addition to setting this up, you either now or later might want to think a little bit about what kind of usage or policy you'd have about usage for the Medium account, particularly in light of some of the discussions in the earlier agenda items tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Any other comments, considerations?
I agree that we should do that, and I propose that we do that at a different meeting.
Okay.
Perhaps that we reach the point where we have something we would want to publish on Medium, that we have the conversation at that point.
I would offer an amendment then to the motion that is, nothing is published, or that any item is published there under the name of the Elections Commission is voted on by the Elections Commission. Who had the motion? Commissioner Jung? Friendly amendment.
Okay.
Okay. Secretary Chan, the roll, please.
Okay. President Donaldson?
Yes.
Donaldson, yes. Vice President Mogi?
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Hill, yes. Commissioner Judonic?
Yes.
Judonic, yes. Commissioner Jung?
Yes.
Jung, yes. Commissioner Rowe?
Yes.
Rowe, yes. It's unanimous. Motion carries.
Next item.
Item number 9, approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the May 16th, 2018 Election Commission meeting.
I move to approve.
Second.
Public comment? Seeing none? Secretary Chen, please call for the vote.
President Donaldson?
Yes.
Donaldson, yes. Vice President Mogi?
Yes.
Mogi, yes. Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Hill, yes. Commissioner Jordanik?
Yes.
Jordanik, yes. Commissioner Jung?
Yes.
Jung, yes. Commissioner Rowe?
Yes.
Rowe, yes. 6-0, motion carries unanimous.
Next
Number
item.
10, agenda items for future meetings. Discussion and possible action regarding items for future agendas.
I guess I'd just like to mention next month I would like to, we will have an agenda item to go over the final results of the election. We'll have a BOPEC meeting that I want to do that will not be at our regular date because that is a public holiday, so it'll be the following week on the 11th of July to review that and make a recommendation to the commission about possible actions regarding the election. Anything else?
I'm sorry, did you say our next meeting is on July 11th?
BOPEC meeting.
Oh, BOPEC.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I can't make it then.
Oh, you can't?
I emailed you about that.
Oh, sorry, I didn't pick it up before I came in. I see.
I can make it, yes, so I guess.
We will have a quorum.
Because the only other suggested date was like a Friday. And I don't know
got
if we want to do a 6 p.m. on a Friday.
Okay.
I think we'll stick with the 11th. Thank you.
Thanks for joining the committee.
Hey, you guys can come over for barbecue. We could do it there. Invite the public.
Okay, public comment on this item.
Good evening again, Jim Soper. Monday and Tuesday, I was up in Sacramento. I've been involved in a group that's working on AB 2125, which is a bill to introduce risk-limiting audits into California. Very briefly, risk-limiting audit is based on the concept of using statistics. If you have a landslide, you don't have to check a lot of ballots in the audit. If it's really close, you need to check a lot. And you use statistics to come up with, we're 95% sure that these results are correct. The other major element there is, if as you're checking the ballots, things aren't working out in the direction you would think, you escalate and you count more and more up to, if necessary, all of them. Now, the bill has been going through the legislature and came up to a vote Tuesday in front of the Senate Elections Committee. It already passed the Assembly, and there were 8 groups opposed. We were, as we're going through the Assembly, we were saying, sort of like no comment, not opposed, and we finally said no, because there's too much. There were problems of, we're going to insist on using paper ballots, we're going to insist that provisionals and vote by mail ballots be included in the audit, and some other things. And of course, the way things work, we get to the committee hearing, and here's a list of 5 amendments that's going to be included. We would like your position on this. And so we had to scramble and talk and so on. What happened is that the bill passed, heavily amended. And the gist of it is that there will be an option for counties to run risk-limiting audits in place of the 1% manual tally in 2020. It will then sunset and will not be valid after 2020. That was a big change because this was going to be like permanent. And they said, okay, let's run this and see how it works in real life. And so one of the things was they were going to find a way to kind of muscle the counties into participating. That was dropped. It's going to be running through 2020. And this is, I thought, I was hoping it would also be available in 2019, but not so far. So looking down the road, this is something the county will want to consider. I would suggest taking the director's advice on this because he's going to be more intimately familiar with the heavy workload involved. But this is coming down the road, and you may want to look at this. I can ask the inventor of risk-limiting audits, Dr. Stark from the University of California, to come over here and do a presentation on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soper. Other comments?
at great personal risk with my heart condition. Brent Turner again, representing Cavo, just in case I have an episode before our next get-together. I wanted to mention that Dr. Gilbert, Alan Deckert, Brian Fox are all available to come before the commission and educate the director, anybody desirous of education regarding open source. There is the ability to have it explained so that even lay people like myself can understand it. I don't find it overly complicated. I'm surprised that the director does, because he's so astute at all other aspects of elections. So that's something to be considered. Also, out of respect for the youth that showed up, that came down to the elections department during the elections, I took a quick poll sampling of 15 students that showed up and asked them, if you could use your smartphone to vote, would you? It was 15 out of 15 yes. With open source, short codes, other technology that's now available, we eventually will vote on our smartphones. I know we're having difficulty over the past 10 years just grappling with getting corporate-owned software out of the systems, and I applaud you for that. And we recognize that the certain people that want to preserve the status quo don't want smartphone voting to be considered. But if we want to be truly progressive here and talk about getting the youth involved in elections and increasing the turnout in the United States, I think California ranks 48th out of 50 states regarding turnout. It's horrible where we're at right now. With smartphone voting, if we could get some people to come present, I think the commission would be interested to know this would be the first time that there is true security, because you could verify your vote at the end of the process through a spreadsheet and know that your vote was counted exactly as had been cast, which would be monumental and a first in the United States, rather than just sending it into a black hole and being faith-based. And of course, the increased turnout, the benefits to the disability community, so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any other public comment? Seeing none. Next item.
Item 11. Mr. President, do you want me to read the entire thing, or do you
No,
need to
that's
go
all right
into
this time.
closed session?
Just the bold is fine.
Okay. Number 11. Objectives and process for annual performance evaluation, Director of Elections.
Yes. So I received one feedback, which honestly I did not have time to incorporate, and we know that based on the last meeting, Director Arndt said that he would not have time to incorporate his objectives because of the election itself. So we were going to review this actually in next month in July. So I actually did not submit my homework for this one. So I would suggest we carry it over till next month, unless there's any comments or questions by the commissioners.
As I have told you elsewhere, I will not be here at the meeting next month, so just to kind of go on the record, the comments that I submitted via email to you were largely questions, kind of asking for clarification around some of the wording around goals for the director. Sorry, let me step back. So the current evaluation as written has a section on goals and outlining the goals for the director of elections. And there is some language in there that, as we discussed at the last meeting, is a little vague. And I, in my comments to you, was just asking for clarification around them. I suspect that the clarification will come through us communicating as a deliberative body. And since that will happen next month, I just want to emphasize here that the more specific we can get about our expectations for good performance, the better for us as an oversight body, the better for the director as he strives to meet those expectations and perform his job well.
Thank you, Commissioner Hill. Yes, and I have Commissioner Hill's input. So we will, if you don't mind, we can maybe address that offline, and appreciate your feedback. Any other comments or questions on this item? Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, it is currently 9:38, and I call this meeting of the Election Commission adjourned.